Hi friends. If you're enjoying my videos, please hit the like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm notice me. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. It was 1986 when I first set foot on Philippine soil as a 20-year-old missionary. The humidity hit me like a physical force as I stepped off the plane in Manila, my white shirt immediately clinging to my back. Our group of 12, 6 men and 6 women, had traveled halfway around the world to spread our faith in this distant tropical land. After 3 days of orientation, we were assigned to Mindoro, a rural island province southwest of Luzon. I remember the bumpy jeepney ride through winding mountain roads, the lush vegetation pressing in from all sides as if nature itself was watching our intrusion. Palm trees swayed against the darkening sky, while rice paddies stretched into the distance, glimmering like mirrors under the setting sun. "You'll be stationed in Barangay San Vicente," our mission coordinator, Brother Wilson, informed us. "It's a remote village, largely untouched by modern conveniences. The locals are receptive but cautious with outsiders." I nodded, trying to hide my apprehension. This was my first time away from home, away from the comfortable suburbs of Salt Lake City where streetlights illuminated every corner and danger seemed a distant concept. Our accommodations were modest but functional. The men's quarters consisted of a small bamboo hut with a thatched roof and simple wooden bunks. It sat at the edge of the village, backed by dense jungle that seemed to whisper secrets in the night breeze. About half a mile away stood the women's residence, a colonial-era house on stilts, simultaneously grand and decrepit, its peeling paint and weathered boards telling stories of bygone eras. "That house has history," remarked the elderly village head, Elder Domingo, as he showed us around. His eyes carried a weight I couldn't decipher then. "It has stood for almost 200 years, built by Spanish colonizers. We are grateful to the owner for allowing your mission to use it." That night, lying on my thin sleeping mat, I listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the jungle, insects chirping in complex symphonies, distant animal calls that rose and fell like strange conversations, and the steady rhythm of rain on the roof. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the disorienting sensation of being in a place so utterly foreign. I had no idea that the strangeness I felt was merely a prelude to the horror that awaited us. The first weeks of our mission passed in a blur of activity and adaptation. Each morning we rose before dawn for prayer and scripture study, then paired off for our daily proselytizing routes. My assigned companion was Brother Joseph Reed, a quiet, thoughtful man from Idaho who had already spent a year in the Philippines. "The key to surviving here is respecting the local customs," Joseph advised as we trudged along dirt paths between villages. "There are beliefs that go back centuries, things our Western minds might dismiss, but the Filipinos take very seriously." I wiped sweat from my brow. "Like what?" "They believe in spirits, not just in the religious sense we're teaching. They believe the dead can linger, especially those who died violently." He lowered his voice. "They say the women's house has history." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it off as superstition. Our days followed a predictable pattern, walking for miles under the merciless sun, stopping at humble homes to share our message, and returning exhausted to our sparse quarters as darkness fell. The women in our group faced their own challenges. Sister Abigail Bennett, our group's medical specialist, often spoke of the difficulties in adapting to the primitive conditions of rural Philippine life. Despite the comparative luxury of their colonial house, they contended with unreliable electricity, questionable water quality, and the persistent sense of isolation. "There's something about that house," Sister Bennett confided during a group dinner. "The walls seem to absorb sound in strange ways. Sometimes I hear footsteps when everyone is accounted for." Brother Wilson dismissed her concerns with a wave. "Old houses settle, wood expands and contracts with humidity. Your minds are playing tricks after long days in an unfamiliar environment." I wanted to believe him, but couldn't ignore the shadow that crossed Sister Bennett's face. She exchanged glances with Sister Patricia Woodward, who looked down at her plate. "It's not just noises," Sister Woodward said quietly. "Sometimes things aren't where we left them. Doors we know we closed are open in the morning." Brother Wilson's expression hardened. "We're here to bring spiritual guidance, not to indulge in ghost stories. I suggest more prayer if you're feeling unsettled." The conversation shifted to safer topics, The progress with local contacts, upcoming community outreach events, the supplies we needed from the main mission center. But something had changed in the atmosphere of our group. A tiny seed of unease had been planted, and in the weeks to come it would grow into full-blown terror. That night, walking back to our hut under a moonless sky, Joseph finally told me what he had heard about the women's house from locals. His words would haunt me long after the mission ended. The monsoon season arrived with a vengeance in our 3rd month. Rain lashed against our hut in violent sheets, turning the ground to mud and the nearby stream into a raging torrent. Our missionary work slowed considerably. Few villagers ventured out in such weather, and many of our planned activities were postponed. Confined to our quarters during the worst of the downpours, we heard stories from Elder Domingo and other villagers who sought shelter with us. They spoke in hushed tones about the colonial house where our female missionaries resided. That house has witnessed much suffering, Elder Domingo said one evening, his weathered face illuminated by kerosene lamps as thunder rolled overhead. During the Japanese occupation, it served as a command post. Many Filipinos were tortured there for information about resistance fighters. Brother William Porter, our group's historian, leaned forward. Is that documented? Elder Domingo shrugged. Not everything makes it into history books, especially in remote places like this. But the elders remember. The screams could be heard throughout the village. I felt a chill despite the tropical heat. What about after the war? The house stood empty for many years. No one wanted to live there. Then, in the 1960s, the current owner bought it for almost nothing. He renovated it, but rarely stayed there himself. Elder Domingo hesitated. There was an incident, about 15 years ago, with children playing beneath the house. The room fell silent except for the drumming of rain on the roof. What kind of incident? Joseph asked. War leaves many dangers behind. Unexploded ordnance, bombs, grenades. They can lie dormant for decades. Elder Domingo's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. 5 children from the village were playing under the house, where it's elevated on stilts. They found something metal and round. They didn't know what it was. My stomach tightened as I anticipated the conclusion. The explosion killed them all instantly. Their blood soaked into the ground beneath the house. Some say their spirits remained trapped there, confused and angry about their sudden death. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Brother Wilson cleared his throat. While we respect local traditions and memories as missionaries, we don't put stock in ghost stories. These tales can be upsetting to those unused to them. Elder Domingo's eyes narrowed slightly. It is not a story intended to frighten, brother. It is a warning. The dead deserve respect, especially those who left this world violently. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had subsided to a gentle patter, but every sound seemed amplified. The dripping of water from leaves, the distant call of night birds, the occasional rustling beneath our hut that could have been small animals seeking shelter. I thought about the women missionaries sleeping in that house built on blood-soaked ground. Were they safe? Was there any truth to these tales of restless spirits? My rational mind rejected such notions, but in the darkness of rural Philippines, far from everything familiar, rationality seemed a fragile defense against the unknown. The next morning, I noticed Sister Bennett's unusual pallor and the dark circles under her eyes. When I asked if she was feeling ill, she merely shook her head. I haven't been sleeping well, she admitted. None of us have. There's something wrong with that house, brother, something that goes beyond creaky floors and settling foundations. I wanted to dismiss her concerns, to offer some practical explanation, but the words died in my throat when I saw the genuine fear in her eyes. Instead, I promised to speak with Brother Wilson about checking the structural integrity of the house, a pragmatic approach that might alleviate their anxieties. Little did I realize that within days, pragmatism would offer no comfort against the terror that awaited us all. As our mission work continued, the atmosphere among our group grew increasingly strained. The women missionaries appeared more exhausted each day, their usual enthusiasm dampened by something they seemed reluctant to discuss openly. During our joint planning meetings, I often caught them exchanging meaningful glances or abruptly changing the subject when certain topics arose. Brother Wilson remained dismissive of their concerns, attributing their fatigue to the challenging environment and cultural adjustment. The Philippines tests everyone's resilience. he insisted during our weekly leaders' meeting. It's natural to experience some psychological stress. But I noticed he never stayed at the women's house past sunset, always finding reasons to leave before darkness fell completely. One afternoon, while distributing medical supplies with Sister Bennett in a neighboring village, she finally confided in me. It started with small things, she said, her voice low despite there being no one nearby to overhear. Items moved from where we'd left them, cold spots in rooms despite the heat, the feeling of being watched when we were alone. I nodded, trying to appear supportive without encouraging what still seemed like imagination run wild. Then one night, Sister Woodward woke to find someone standing at the foot of her bed, a small figure, dripping wet. When she screamed and turned on her lamp, there was nothing there. Perhaps a dream? I suggested gently. The boundary between sleep and wakefulness can be... It wasn't a dream, Sister Bennett interrupted, her knuckles white around the medical bag she carried. Because 3 nights later, I saw the same figure in the hallway outside the bathroom. A child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with terrible burns on one side of his body. He looked at me with such accusation. I felt my mouth go dry. Have you told Brother Wilson about these sightings? He thinks we're being hysterical women. Her voice hardened. But there's more. Sister Catherine woke up with bruises on her arms, finger marks like someone had grabbed her in her sleep. And we've all heard the sounds. What sounds? Whimpering, children crying, and sometimes in the dead of night a sound like an explosion, but muffled, as if it's happening underground or very far away. We walked in silence for several moments before she continued. The locked closet is the worst. It's in the main hallway between the bedrooms. None of us has a key for it, and the owner never mentioned it. Sometimes it feels warm to the touch, and sometimes I swear I can hear scratching from inside, like something trying to get out. That evening, I spoke privately with Joseph about what Sister Bennett had told me. I expected skepticism, but his response chilled me. The locals won't go near that house after dark, he said. I've tried to get more information, but they just make signs to ward off evil and change the subject. Whatever happened there goes beyond just the children who died from the grenade. You believe something supernatural is occurring? I asked, surprised. Joseph had always struck me as thoroughly practical. He hesitated. I believe those women are genuinely frightened, and not without reason. And I believe we have a responsibility to ensure their safety, whether the threat is physical or otherwise. 2 days later, during an unusually severe thunderstorm, the women's fears would be vindicated in a way none of us could have anticipated. The storm hit without warning. One moment, the evening sky was clear with stars beginning to appear. The next, black clouds rolled in from the mountains, bringing wind that bent palm trees nearly horizontal and rain that fell in blinding sheets. Lightning slashed across the sky in jagged patterns, followed by thunder that shook the foundations of our hut. We had just finished our evening meal when frantic pounding at our door cut through the storm's roar. Joseph rushed to open it, revealing Sister Bennett, Sister Woodward, and the 4 other women missionaries huddled under a tarp that provided little protection against the deluge. You have to help us, Sister Bennett gasped, water streaming down her face. Something's happening at the house. Brother Wilson pushed forward. Come inside, all of you. You're soaked to the bone. The women crowded into our small hut, dripping water onto the bamboo floor. Their faces were pale with terror, eyes wide and haunted. Sister Catherine Donnelly, normally the most composed among them, was shaking uncontrollably. Tell us what happened, I said, handing out towels and the spare shirts we had. Sister Woodward spoke first, her voice trembling. We were all in the main room, waiting out the storm. The electricity went out, so we lit candles. Then we started to hear things. What things? Brother Wilson asked, his dismissive tone noticeably absent now. Children's voices, Sister Bennett said. Whispering at first, then crying. It seemed to come from everywhere, the walls, the floor, outside the windows. Sister Donnelly continued. We thought it might be village children seeking shelter from the storm, so I went to check the back door. It was locked from inside, but when I turned around... She swallowed hard. There was a handprint on the window. A small one, like a child's, but it was burned into the glass from the outside. The temperature in the house dropped so suddenly we could see our breath, Sister Woodward added, and the locked closet door began to rattle, like someone was trying to force it open from inside. But what made us run, Sister Bennet said, meeting my eyes directly, was when we all felt hands touching us. Small, cold hands grabbing at our clothes, our hair. We couldn't see anything, but we could feel them. That's when we decided to come here. Brother Wilson paced the small room, clearly conflicted. Finally, he sighed. I'll assemble a team to check the house. Brother Reed, Brother Grant, Brother Porter, Brother Jenkins, and Brother Mason will come with me. The rest of you stay here with the women. I grabbed a flashlight and raincoat, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Part of me wanted to refuse, to stay in the relative safety of our hut, but I couldn't abandon my responsibilities, or my curiosity about what was truly happening in that colonial house. The 6 of us trudged through the storm, mud sucking at our boots, rain pelting us from all directions. The women's house loomed ahead, a dark silhouette occasionally illuminated by lightning. It seemed larger somehow, more imposing than usual, its elevated structure giving the impression it was floating above the ground. When we reached the front porch, we found the main door locked. They must have locked it when they left, Brother Wilson shouted over the storm's noise. Brother Porter tried the windows, but they too were secured from inside. We circled the house, checking every possible entrance, finding each one locked. "This doesn't make sense," Joseph yelled. "How could they all be locked from inside if no one's there?" A crash of thunder punctuated his question, followed by a flash of lightning that revealed something that stopped my heart momentarily. A face at an upstairs window, pale and small, watching us with hollow eyes. "Did you see that?" I gasped, pointing. But another lightning flash showed only an empty window. Brother Wilson, frustration overcoming his fear, marched back to the front door and delivered a powerful kick near the lock. The wood splintered, and a second kick sent the door crashing inward. We entered cautiously, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The interior was still and silent except for rain pattering on the roof and the occasional burst of thunder. "Let's split up," Brother Wilson commanded. "Check every room. There must be a rational explanation for all this." How wrong he was. The colonial house seemed to absorb our flashlight beams, the darkness pressing in from all sides. We moved in pairs, Brother Wilson with Brother Porter taking the ground floor, Joseph and Brother Jenkins checking the rooms upstairs, while Brother Mason and I investigated the kitchen and rear portions of the house. The women's belongings lay scattered about, evidence of their hasty departure. A half-eaten meal remained on the dining table, candles burned down to nubs, chairs overturned as if they'd been pushed back in panic. "Everything seems normal," Brother Mason whispered as we moved through the kitchen. "Just looks like they left in a hurry." I nodded, but couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every creak of the old house, every tap of rain against the windows seemed loaded with menace. Our flashlight beams created monstrous shadows that shifted and moved along the walls. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to a dark stain spreading on the ceiling. Brother Mason raised his flashlight. Probably just a leak from the storm. But as we watched, the stain grew, spreading across the white ceiling in branching patterns. It wasn't the brown discoloration of water damage, but something darker, almost black in our flashlight beams. A droplet fell, landing on the back of my hand. I instinctively wiped it away, then froze when I saw the smear it left behind. Red, not water but blood. "We need to find the others," I said, my voice tight with fear. We found Brother Wilson and Brother Porter in the main hallway, standing before the locked closet the women had mentioned. Brother Wilson was examining the door with intense concentration. "The wood around this lock is newer than the rest of the door," he observed. "It's been replaced relatively recently." "The women said no one has a key," I told him, deliberately not mentioning the blood from the ceiling. I feared being dismissed as hysterical, just as the women had been. "Where are Joseph and Jenkins?" Brother Mason asked, glancing up the darkened staircase. As if in answer, a cry of alarm echoed from above, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Joseph appeared at the top of the stairs, his face drained of color. "You need to see this," he said. "All of you." We followed him up the creaking staircase to a bedroom at the end of the hallway. Brother Jenkins stood in the center of the room, flashlight trained on the wall opposite the door. What I saw there made my blood turn ice cold. Handprints, dozens of small handprints, covered the wall in a macabre display. Some appeared to be made in dirt or ash, others in what looked distressingly like dried blood. They formed a pattern that seemed almost deliberate, spiraling outward from a central point. "These weren't here earlier today," Brother Jenkins said, his voice barely audible. "Sister Bennett was in this room just before dinner. She would have noticed this." Before anyone could respond, a tremendous crash came from downstairs, so powerful it shook the entire house. We rushed down to find the source. The closet door had burst open, its lock seemingly torn from the wood. The beam of Brother Wilson's flashlight revealed an empty closet, devoid of shelves or storage. The interior walls were scorched black, as if by intense heat or explosion. On the floor lay a single rusted piece of metal, curved and hollow, unmistakably a fragment of a grenade casing. "We should leave," Joseph said, voicing what we all were thinking. "Now." We turned to exit, only to find our path blocked by standing water seeping under the front door and spreading across the entrance hall. Thunder crashed directly overhead, and in the momentary illumination from lightning through the windows, I saw impossible reflections in the water. Small faces looking up at us from beneath the surface, their expressions frozen in eternal terror. Brother Wilson, his composure finally breaking, splashed through the water toward the door. "Everyone out! We're leaving this place now!" As we fled into the storm, I glanced back at the house. Through the upstairs window where I'd seen the face earlier, I now saw 5 small silhouettes watching us go. A final lightning flash illuminated them clearly. Children with terrible burns covering half their bodies, their eyes hollow and accusing. We returned to our hut, thoroughly soaked and deeply shaken. The women's relief at seeing us safe quickly turned to horror as we recounted what we'd found. "What do we do now?" Sister Bennett asked, her voice small. Brother Wilson, his former skepticism entirely gone, reached a decision. "Tonight, we all stay here. Tomorrow, I'll contact mission headquarters and request immediate relocation for the women. No one is going back to that house." As the storm gradually subsided, we settled in for an uneasy night. The women took the bunks while we men spread sleeping mats on the floor. Despite our exhaustion, sleep seemed an impossible luxury as we processed what we had witnessed. Just as drowsiness finally began to claim me, a sound cut through the quiet night. Distant at first, then growing clearer. A muffled explosion, exactly as Sister Bennett had described, followed by what sounded like children crying in pain and fear. No one spoke, but I knew from the tension in the room that everyone had heard it. We had all been given a glimpse into something beyond ordinary understanding. A tragedy from the past refusing to remain buried, pain so profound it had left an imprint on reality itself. Morning arrived with merciful brightness, the storm having cleared to reveal a washed-clean sky and humid air that steamed as the sun rose. Despite the cheerful weather, our group remained subdued, speaking in hushed tones and jumping at unexpected sounds. Brother Wilson disappeared immediately after breakfast to make radio contact with the mission headquarters. When he returned 2 hours later, his expression was grim. "The earliest they can relocate us is 3 days from now," he announced. "The roads are washed out from the storm, and the nearest vehicle that can transport all of us is currently on another island." Sister Donnelly made a small, distressed sound. "We can't stay here for 3 more days." "You won't have to return to that house," Brother Wilson assured her. "We'll make arrangements for you to stay in the village. There are several families willing to host you." "What about our belongings?" Sister Woodward asked. "Everything we own is still in that house." A heavy silence followed. Finally, Joseph spoke up. "I'll go back with the team. We can retrieve your essential items." Despite my fear, I volunteered along with Brother Jenkins and Brother Mason. The 4 of us set out under the late morning sun, the muddy path to the colonial house seeming much longer than it had the previous night. In daylight, the house appeared almost benign, a weathered colonial structure with peeling paint and shuttered windows. Only the splintered front door served as evidence of our nocturnal invasion. "We get in, gather their things, and get out," Joseph instructed as we approached. "No exploring, no investigating. Just grab what they need and leave." We nodded in agreement, then cautiously entered the house. Sunlight streamed through the windows, eliminating the terrifying shadows of the previous night. The water in the entryway had dried, leaving only a faint stain on the wooden floorboards. "Let's split up to work faster," Brother Mason suggested. "I'll take Sister Bennett's and Sister Woodward's rooms." "I'll handle Sister Donnelly's and Sister Rivera's belongings," Brother Jenkins said. Joseph nodded. "I'll get Sister Anderson's and Sister Tomlin's things. Brother Grant, check the bathroom and common areas for any personal items." I moved through the house collecting toiletries, books, and other communal possessions, keeping my eyes averted from the still open closet door in the main hallway. Despite my determination to focus solely on the task at hand, I felt an irresistible pull toward that blackened space, a compulsion to understand what had truly happened there. After gathering everything from the common areas, I found myself alone in the hallway, staring at the closet. The fragment of grenade casing still lay on its floor, illuminated by a shaft of sunlight from a nearby window. Against my better judgment, I approached the closet and knelt before it. The scorched interior walls bore testament to an intense explosion. I picked up the metal fragment, turning it over in my hands. It was unmistakably military, part of an American-made M26 grenade from the World War II era, common throughout the Philippines as leftover ordnance. Something about the closet's dimensions struck me as odd. I ran my hands along the back wall, feeling the charred wood. It seemed wrong somehow, too shallow compared to the exterior dimensions of the house. I rapped my knuckles against the back wall, hearing a hollow sound in response. Pressing more firmly, I felt the wood give slightly. "Brother Grant?" Joseph's voice called from upstairs. "Have you finished down there? We should leave soon." "Almost done," I replied, my attention still focused on the wall. I pushed harder, and to my shock, a section of the back wall swung inward, revealing a hidden space beyond. The air that wafted out was stale and carried a faint, sickening odor. I directed my flashlight into the darkness, illuminating a small chamber, barely large enough for a person to stand in. The beam revealed writing on the walls, desperate scratches and markings, some in English, others in what appeared to be Tagalog. Among them, one phrase repeated, "God forgive us." In the center of the floor lay 5 small skeletons, their bones darkened with age, arranged in a circle as if they had been huddled together in their final moments. Scraps of decayed clothing clung to the remains, and among them lay several toys. A small wooden car, a doll missing its head, marbles scattered like fallen stars. I stumbled backward, horror closing my throat. These weren't just remains of children killed by an accidental explosion. They had been sealed in this hidden room, trapped to die in darkness. "Brother Grant." Joseph appeared at the end of the hallway, alarm in his voice. "What are you doing?" I could only point mutely at my discovery. Joseph approached cautiously, then froze as he saw what lay beyond the false wall. "Dear God," he whispered. Within minutes, all 4 of us stood before the grim tableau, trying to comprehend its implications. "This isn't from the grenade incident," Brother Mason said, his voice trembling. "These children weren't killed by an explosion." Brother Jenkins knelt to examine the remains more closely, his medical training overcoming his horror. "Based on the positioning and the sealed room, they were imprisoned here. They starved to death or suffocated." "But why?" I asked. "Who would do such a thing?" Joseph pointed to a faded photograph tacked to one wall of the hidden room. It showed a stern-faced man in military uniform standing before the colonial house. "I think this might have been during the Japanese occupation. Perhaps these were children of resistance fighters, imprisoned as leverage or punishment." "And the grenade story?" Brother Mason asked. "A convenient explanation for why children's spirits might haunt this house," Joseph said grimly. The truth was too horrible to acknowledge. A long silence followed as we contemplated the tragedy we had uncovered. Children condemned to a slow, terrifying death, their bodies hidden behind a wall, their fate obscured by a more palatable narrative of accidental death. "We need to report this to the authorities," I said finally. "These children deserve proper burial and remembrance." Joseph nodded. "We'll tell Brother Wilson first, then contact the police. But for now, let's finish gathering the women's belongings and leave this place. We've disturbed enough." As we turned to go, a soft sound came from the hidden room, what might have been the whisper of small voices saying thank you, or perhaps just the settling of ancient boards. Either way, I felt a weight lift slightly, as if in uncovering the truth, we had taken the first step toward releasing these trapped souls from their earthly torment. The revelation of what truly happened in the colonial house sent ripples through our mission group and the village. Within hours of our report to Brother Wilson, local authorities arrived to investigate our discovery. The police chief, a weathered man named Inspector Reyes, listened gravely to our account. There have always been stories about this house, he admitted, but no one knew the full truth. Historical records, hastily consulted, confirmed Joseph's theory. During the Japanese occupation, the house had served as a headquarters for a particularly brutal commander. Resistance had been strong in the area, and reprisals against locals, even children, were not uncommon. The remains were carefully removed for proper burial, the hidden room documented and sealed. Inspector Reyes promised a full investigation, though he acknowledged that after more than 40 years, justice in the conventional sense might be impossible. That evening, the entire village gathered for a memorial service. Elder Domingo led prayers in both Tagalog and English, while local elders performed traditional rituals to help guide lost spirits to peace. Our missionary group joined in, setting aside doctrinal differences in respect for the community's grief and healing process. In all cultures, in all faiths, children are sacred, Brother Wilson said during the service, his earlier skepticism completely gone. What happened in that house was an abomination against God's most innocent creations. Today, we honor their memory and pray for their peace. Sister Bennett, who had been most affected by the hauntings, placed 5 small candles at the improvised altar. "We felt your pain," she whispered. "Now find your way home." The following day, mission headquarters confirmed our relocation to a different village. As we packed our few belongings, I found myself drawn once more to the colonial house. Despite everything, I felt compelled to see it one last time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as I approached the structure. It seemed different now, smaller somehow, less imposing. The oppressive atmosphere that had surrounded it had dissipated, replaced by a solemn quietude. Standing beneath the stilts where the children had allegedly found the grenade, I noticed something gleaming in the dirt. I knelt and uncovered a tarnished medal, a military decoration from the World War II era, possibly belonging to one of the children's parents. I pocketed it, intending to give it to Inspector Reyes as additional evidence. As I straightened, a sudden breeze rustled the surrounding vegetation. For just a moment, I thought I heard children's laughter. Not the tormented cries we'd experienced before, but the joyful sounds of play and freedom. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the house in golden light. Then the moment passed, and I was alone with only the sounds of birds and distant village life. That night, our last in San Vicente, I dreamed of 5 children running through sunlit fields, their faces bright with joy, moving toward a light too brilliant to comprehend. Upon waking, I felt a profound sense of peace that contrasted sharply with the terror of previous nights. At breakfast, I discovered that Sister Bennett and several others had experienced similar dreams. "They're free," she said simply. "They just needed someone to know the truth, to remember them as they were." Our group was relocated to Barangay Esperanza the next day, where we continued our mission work without supernatural interruption. But none of us ever forgot what we experienced in that colonial house in San Vicente. Years later, long after returning to America, I received a letter from Elder Domingo. The colonial house had been demolished, he wrote, and a memorial garden planted in its place. The garden bloomed with unprecedented vigor, as if nourished by more than just soil and rain. "The children are at peace," his letter concluded, "and so is our village." I keep that letter still, along with the tarnished medal I found. They serve as reminders of a truth I learned in the Philippines, that some bonds transcend death, that unacknowledged suffering can echo through time, and that sometimes, bearing witness to forgotten tragedy is the greatest service one can offer. The dead may speak to the living in many ways. The wisdom lies in learning to listen, and in having the courage to uncover truths long buried, no matter how painful they may be. I've been a park ranger at Blackwood National Forest for 15 years now. The locals call me Ranger Mike, though my full name is Michael Thorne. I know every trail, every stream, and every ridge in these 500,000 acres of pristine wilderness. At least, I thought I did. That morning began like any other in early October. The forest was ablaze with autumn colors, crimson maples, golden aspens, and the deep green of ancient pines. I started my routine patrol at dawn, the mist still clinging to the valley floor as I drove my Jeep along the Eastern Service Road. The radio crackled to life. "Mike, you copy?" It was Diane from headquarters. "I'm here," I replied, slowing the Jeep. Something in her voice sounded off. "We've got reports of gunshots near Bear Creek. Probably nothing, but worth checking out." I frowned. Bear Creek was in a protected sanctuary area, no hunting allowed, not even during season. "I'm about 30 minutes out. I'll head there now." The service road narrowed as I approached the creek, forcing me to continue on foot. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just silence, broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I smelled it before I saw it, the metallic tang of blood. Just off the trail lay a massive bull elk, its magnificent rack of antlers sawed off at the base. The animal had been killed recently, its body still warm to the touch. The poachers had left everything but the antlers, which would fetch thousands on the black market. As I radioed in the location, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Human footprints leading away from the kill site. Not just adult prints, but smaller ones too. A child's. The tracks led deeper into the forest, toward the most remote section of the park, an area locals called the Shadow Plains. Legend had it that people who ventured too far into those woods sometimes never returned. I had always dismissed such stories as campfire tales. But as I followed those tracks, the forest darkening around me despite the morning sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from between the trees. My radio crackled again, but this time I heard only static. I was out of range. I pulled out my map and compass, marking my position. The child's footprints continued northward, small and uneven, occasionally joined by the larger boot prints of at least 3 adults. Why would poachers bring a child into these woods? As I crested a small ridge, I spotted something colorful against the forest floor. A small backpack, decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. I picked it up, unzipping the main compartment. Inside was a water bottle, some candy wrappers, and a small notebook. On the first page, in careful childish handwriting, was a name, Jamie Edwards. The backpack answered one question, but raised a dozen more. Was Jamie a child who had wandered away from a camping family? Or worse, was Jamie with the poachers? The sun was beginning its westward descent, casting long shadows through the trees. I had 4 hours of daylight left at most. I needed to find this child before nightfall. Anyone lost in these woods after dark faced dangers beyond just the cold. Mountain lions, bears awakening from their pre-hibernation lethargy, and the rugged terrain itself. I continued following the tracks, noticing something disturbing. The adult prints were now positioned on either side of the child's, as if they were forcing Jamie to walk between them. The forest grew denser, the ancient trees blocking more and more sunlight. Somewhere in the distance I heard a sound that sent a chill down my spine, the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle. I instinctively dropped to a crouch, scanning the forest around me. The shot had come from the north, perhaps half a mile ahead. I drew my service pistol, a poor match for a hunting rifle, but better than nothing. As I moved forward with greater caution, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees here were older, gnarled with age, their branches twisting together overhead to form a canopy that blocked most of the remaining daylight. I found myself at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a crude camp, a fire pit, 3 small tents, and hanging from a makeshift rack, several fresh animal pelts. But it was the object at the far edge of the camp that made my stomach turn. A cage, barely large enough for a child, and it was empty. The abandoned camp told a story I didn't want to read. Blood-stained knives lay beside skinning tools. High-caliber rifle shells were scattered near the fire pit. These weren't opportunistic poachers. This was a professional operation. I approached the cage cautiously, my hand still on my pistol. The door hung open, its padlock broken. Inside was a small blanket and an empty water bottle. Someone had been kept here, and had either escaped or been moved. I photographed everything with my phone, though I knew I'd have no signal to send the images back to headquarters. Night was approaching faster than I'd anticipated. the dense canopy above turning the forest floor to twilight even though my watch read only 4:30 p.m. A sound behind me. The snap of a twig sent me spinning around, pistol raised. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Forest Service, identify yourself." Silence answered me. I completed my documentation of the camp and turned my attention back to the tracks. The child's footprints now showed a different pattern. Longer strides, deeper impressions at the toes. Running. I followed them away from the camp, moving as quickly as I dared in the fading light. The adult tracks followed, but with an irregular spacing that suggested they too were running. They were chasing the child. My heart pounded as I jogged through the forest, scanning for any sign of movement ahead. The tracks led to a small stream, then vanished. The child, Jamie, had entered the water. A smart move. It would hide their scent and their trail. But which way had they gone? I stood in the middle of the stream, water soaking through my boots, and looked in both directions. Upstream led deeper into the wilderness, a path of certain death for a lost child. Downstream eventually led to Blackwater Lake and several camping areas. If Jamie had any wilderness sense at all, they would have gone downstream. I waded through the cold water, my flashlight beam dancing across the surface. After about a quarter mile, I spotted it. A small footprint in the mud of the bank. Jamie had exited the stream here, but the adult prints were nowhere to be seen. Had the poachers given up the chase? Somehow, I doubted it. The forest was nearly dark now, the only light coming from my flashlight and the faint glow of a rising moon. I needed to find shelter soon, for myself and, hopefully, for Jamie. The child's tracks led toward a dense thicket of brambles, the kind of place a small person could squeeze into but adults would struggle to follow. Smart kid. "Jamie?" I called softly. "My name is Ranger Mike. I'm here to help you. Are you hiding in there?" A rustling sound came from the thicket, then silence. "I found your backpack," I continued, keeping my voice gentle. "The one with the dinosaurs. I'm not with the bad men. I'm a park ranger." A small voice, trembling with fear and cold, finally answered. "They killed my dad." The words hit me like a physical blow. I shined my light toward the voice, careful not to blind whoever was speaking. A small face peered out from between the brambles, a boy of perhaps 8 or 9, with dirt-streaked cheeks and wide, terrified eyes. "Jamie?" I asked. He nodded. "I'm going to get you out of here, okay? But we need to be very quiet. Those men might still be looking for us." "They are," he whispered. "I heard them talking. They said they'd find me before morning." As Jamie squeezed out of the thicket, I got a better look at him. His clothes were torn, his hands scratched from the brambles. But what concerned me most was the haunted look in his eyes, the look of a child who had seen things no child should ever witness. "My dad and I were camping," he explained as I wrapped my emergency thermal blanket around his shoulders. "These men came to our campsite. They asked my dad for directions, then..." His voice broke. "You don't have to talk about it now," I said quickly. "Right now, we need to find a safe place to spend the night." As if in answer to my words, the distant crack of a rifle echoed through the forest. "They're coming," Jamie whispered, pressing against my side. I made a quick decision. We can't outrun them, and we can't hide here. We need to find higher ground where we can defend ourselves if necessary. I knew of an old fire lookout tower about a mile northeast, long abandoned by the Forest Service but still standing. It would give us visibility and a defensible position. "Can you walk a little further?" I asked Jamie. He nodded, jaw set with determination despite his exhaustion. As we moved through the darkening forest, I kept one hand on my pistol and the other on Jamie's shoulder. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a pursuer. The lookout tower was our only hope, but reaching it meant crossing nearly a mile of open terrain in moonlight. The poachers wouldn't just be hunting us. They'd be hunting evidence, a witness, a child who could identify them. And they knew these woods almost as well as I did. The fire lookout tower appeared before us like a sentinel from another era, its weathered frame silhouetted against the night sky. 40 feet tall with a small cabin at the top, it offered both shelter and visibility, exactly what we needed. "We have to climb," I whispered to Jamie, who stared up at the structure with apprehension. "I'm scared of heights," he admitted, his voice small. I'll be right behind you the whole way, I promised. And once we're up there, we'll be safe. That last part might have been a lie, but sometimes lies are necessary when a child's courage is all that stands between them and harm. The wooden ladder creaked under our weight as we climbed. I winced at every sound, imagining it carrying through the night air to the ears of our pursuers. Jamie moved slowly but steadily, his small hands gripping each rung with determination. The cabin at the top was dusty but intact, a single room about 12 feet square, with windows on all sides and an old cot in one corner. I closed the trapdoor behind us and pushed a heavy desk over it. It wouldn't stop a determined attacker for long, but it might buy us precious seconds. Try to get some rest, I told Jamie, settling him on the cot with my thermal blanket. I'll keep watch. As the boy curled up, exhaustion finally overwhelming his fear, I surveyed our surroundings through the grimy windows. The moonlight revealed the forest stretching in all directions, silver-tipped trees swaying gently in the night breeze. In the distance, the lights of civilization, too far to reach before dawn. I checked my phone again, still no signal. My radio remained silent, the mountains blocking any transmission to headquarters. We were truly alone. Jamie's breathing had steadied into sleep, but it was fitful, punctuated by small whimpers. What horrors played behind his closed eyelids? What had he witnessed at that campsite before being taken? I pulled out his dinosaur backpack, examining it more carefully now. Inside the front pocket, I found a family photo, Jamie, a smiling man who must be his father, and a woman with Jamie's same dark hair and eyes. Was she waiting somewhere, frantically wondering where her husband and son were? A flash of light in the forest below caught my attention. Moving swiftly, I extinguished my flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness. I crouched by the window, peering into the night. There it was again. A beam of light sweeping through the trees about half a mile east of our position. Then another, from the south. The poachers were methodically searching the forest, and they were closing in. I counted at least 3 separate lights. They had split up to cover more ground, which meant they were confident, too confident. They didn't expect resistance. They expected to find a frightened child, alone and helpless. Instead, they would find me. But 1 pistol against 3 hunting rifles wasn't a confrontation I was eager to have. I gently woke Jamie, putting a finger to my lips to indicate silence. "They're coming," I whispered. "But they don't know we're up here yet. We need to stay very quiet." His eyes widened with fear, but he nodded resolutely. "If they find us," I continued, "I want you to hide under the cot, and don't come out until I tell you it's safe. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, stay hidden." "Can you do that?" Another nod, more hesitant this time. One of the flashlight beams had changed direction. It was heading straight for the tower. They'd found our tracks. I positioned myself at the window facing the approaching light, my pistol ready. The tower offered a good vantage point, but it was also a trap. No escape route except down the same ladder we'd used to climb up. Minutes passed like hours as the light grew closer. I could now make out a silhouette. A large man moving with the practiced stealth of a hunter. He carried a rifle in one hand, flashlight in the other. He reached the base of the tower and paused, shining his light upward. I ducked away from the window, pulling Jamie down with me. "Check the tower, Vince," a voice called from the darkness. "Kid might have holed up there." "On it," the man, Vince, replied. The ladder creaked as he began to climb. Jamie pressed against me, trembling. "Under the cot," I whispered, gently pushing him toward it. "Now." He scrambled underneath just as the trap door rattled, Vince testing it against the weight of the desk I'd placed on top. "Somebody's up here," he called down. "Door's blocked." "Break it down," came the reply. I had seconds to decide. Wait for him to force his way in, giving me the advantage of surprise but putting Jamie at risk in a confined shootout. Or face him on the ladder, where one misstep could send me plummeting to the ground. The trapdoor shuddered as Vince slammed his shoulder against it. The desk slid an inch, another slam, another inch. I made my decision. Quickly, I moved to the opposite window and opened it. Climbing carefully onto the ledge, I edged around the outside of the cabin, my back pressed against the wall, until I reached the side with the ladder. Vince was fully focused on the trapdoor, unaware of my approach from outside. As he reared back for another slam, I acted. Reaching through the window, I grabbed his jacket and pulled with all my strength. Off balance and surprised, he tumbled backward, his rifle clattering down the ladder as he grabbed at the rungs to save himself. For a moment, we locked eyes, his wide with shock, mine narrowed with determination. "Forest Service," I said, my voice deadly calm as I aimed my pistol. "You're under arrest," his face contorted with rage. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Ranger." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," I replied. "Poachers, murderers, child abductors." He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "We're just the tip of the iceberg. You think this is about poaching? There's millions in this operation, people who'd miss us if we don't come back." From below, a voice called up. "Vince, what's going on?" I kept my pistol trained on Vince. "Tell them everything's fine. Tell them to wait their turn." His eyes calculated, weighing his options. Then, to my surprise, he called down, "It's clear. Just some old equipment up here. No sign of the kid." I frowned, confused by his compliance, until I felt the tower shudder beneath us. The third man. He wasn't calling up from the ground. He was on the other side of the tower, climbing up. Vince saw the realization in my eyes and smiled. "Like I said, Ranger, you have no idea what you're dealing with." The tower shuddered again as the third poacher continued climbing. I had seconds to act before I was caught between two assailants. "Inside," I ordered Vince, gesturing with my pistol. "Slowly." He complied, climbing back through the window with deliberate movements. I followed, keeping my gun trained on him while trying to listen for the other climber. "Face down on the floor," I said. "Hands behind your head." As Vince lay down, I caught a glimpse of Jamie's wide eyes peering out from under the cot. I gave him a reassuring nod before turning my attention back to the immediate threat. The trapdoor rattled again. The second poacher was still trying to break in from below. Meanwhile, the third was moments away from reaching our level from the outside. I was outnumbered and outgunned. I needed to even the odds. Keeping my pistol aimed at Vince, I moved to the desk blocking the trapdoor. With one swift movement, I shoved it aside. The trapdoor flew open, and as the second poacher's head appeared, I brought the butt of my pistol down hard. He crumpled, falling back down the ladder with a series of thuds and a pained groan. Vince used the distraction to lunge at me, tackling me to the floor. My pistol skittered away across the wooden planks as we grappled. He was heavier and stronger, but I fought with the desperation of a man protecting not just himself, but a child. As we struggled, the window behind us shattered as the third poacher broke through. I caught a glimpse of him raising a rifle. "Don't shoot, you idiot!" Vince yelled. "You'll hit me!" The momentary distraction was all I needed. I drove my knee up, connecting solidly. Vince howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I scrambled toward my pistol, but the third poacher was faster. He kicked it away, then trained his rifle on me. "That's enough, Ranger," he said, his voice calm and cold. "Game over." I raised my hand slowly, mind racing for a plan. The third poacher was younger than Vince, with a hard face and cold eyes. His rifle never wavered as he kept it aimed at my chest. "Where's the kid?" he demanded. I remained silent, acutely aware of Jamie hidden just a few feet away. If they found him. Vince had recovered enough to stand, though he was still bent slightly from pain. "He's here somewhere," he growled. "Find him, Mac." The younger poacher, Mac, began to search the small cabin, keeping his rifle trained on me. When he approached the cot, my heart nearly stopped. "Check under it," Vince ordered. Mac bent down, rifle still aimed in my direction. In that split second of divided attention, I made my move. I charged, not at Mac, but at the open trap door. Before either poacher could react, I was halfway down the ladder. "After him!" Vince shouted. I heard the thunderous report of Mac's rifle, felt the ladder vibrate as a bullet splintered wood inches from my hand. But I kept moving, using gravity to slide down faster than I could climb. At the bottom, I nearly collided with the second poacher, who was just regaining consciousness. I shoved him aside and sprinted into the forest. Behind me, I heard the poachers shouting, their flashlights dancing wildly as they scrambled down the ladder in pursuit. I had only one advantage: knowledge of the terrain. The moon provided just enough light to navigate as I ran deeper into the forest. My plan was desperate but clear: lead them away from Jamie, then circle back. The boy was safer hidden in the tower than exposed in the forest with me. I crashed through underbrush deliberately, leaving an obvious trail. After several hundred yards, I changed direction, moving with greater stealth, stepping on rocks and roots to minimize my tracks. The poachers' voices grew more distant as I doubled back toward the tower, using a different approach than my retreat. From my new position, concealed in the underbrush, I could see Vince and the second poacher at the base of the tower. The second man was clearly injured from his fall, leaning against the structure for support. "Spread out," Vince was saying. "Mac, you stay with the kid. Evans and I will find the ranger." So the second poacher was named Evans, and Mac was still in the tower with Jamie. I watched as Vince and Evans moved into the forest, following my false trail. When they were out of sight, I approached the tower, moving silently from shadow to shadow. Now came the hardest part, getting back up to Jamie without alerting Mac. The ladder creaked treacherously with each step. I paused frequently, listening for any sound from above. The cabin remained silent. Near the top, I peered through the trapdoor opening. Mac stood at the far window, rifle ready, watching the forest where his companions had disappeared. Jamie was nowhere in sight. Still hidden under the cot, I hoped. I needed a distraction, something to draw Mac away from his position long enough for me to get through the trapdoor. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my keys. With a careful aim, I tossed them through the open window into the forest beyond. The metallic clatter had the desired effect. Mac spun around, moving quickly to the opposite window to investigate the sound. In that moment, I hauled myself up through the trapdoor and lunged for my pistol, which still lay on the floor where it had been kicked. Mac turned at the sound, bringing his rifle to bear. Too late. My pistol was already aimed. "Drop it," I ordered, my voice steady despite my racing heart. For a moment, I thought he might risk a shot. Then, slowly, he lowered his rifle to the floor. "Hands on your head. Face the wall." As he complied, I called softly, "Jamie, it's safe now. You can come out." The boy emerged from under the cot, tears streaming down his face. I kept my pistol trained on Mac as I moved to Jamie's side. "You're okay," I assured him. "But we need to move quickly. The others will be back soon." Using zip ties from my gear, I secured Mac's hands behind his back. I collected his rifle and checked the ammunition, a high-powered hunting round, illegal in the park even during season. "What's your plan, Ranger?" Mac asked, his voice mocking despite his position. "You can't outrun Vince, and even if you do, there are others. This operation doesn't stop with us." I ignored him, focusing instead on Jamie. "We're going to leave now. Stay close to me." As we moved toward the trapdoor, Mac spoke again. "The kid saw everything. That's why we took him. You really think you can protect him?" I paused, then turned back to face him. "Yes," I said simply. "I can. And I will." With Jamie safely down the ladder, I followed, closing the trapdoor behind us. Dawn was approaching, a faint lightening of the eastern sky promising visibility that would help us and hinder our pursuers. We moved swiftly through the forest, keeping to game trails and rocky ground where we'd leave minimal tracks. Jamie kept pace admirably, his fear giving him endurance beyond his years. "Where are we going?" he whispered, as we paused for a brief rest. "There's a ranger station about 5 miles south," I explained. "We should reach it by mid-morning. From there, we can call for help." He nodded, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "My dad, is he really—" I knelt down to his level, meeting his eyes. "I don't know for sure, Jamie, but when we reach the station, we'll get help. And I promise you, whatever happened, whoever did this, they'll be brought to justice." As we prepared to move again, a distant shout reached us. Vince and Evans had returned to the tower and discovered Mac. "Run," I told Jamie, taking his hand. "Run now." The first light of dawn filtered through the canopy as Jamie and I pushed southward. The boy's endurance was fading, his steps becoming unsteady with fatigue. I alternated between carrying him and letting him walk, knowing we couldn't afford to slow our pace. We'd covered perhaps 3 miles since leaving the tower, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as we approached the river canyon that separated us from the ranger station. Behind us, I occasionally heard distant shouts or the crack of a branch. Our pursuers were following, though they'd fallen back since I'd taken Mac's rifle. "I need to rest," Jamie whispered, his face pale with exhaustion. I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. We'd been moving for nearly 4 hours. Just a little farther, I encouraged him. See those rocks ahead? We can rest there for a few minutes. The outcropping offered both shelter and a vantage point. As Jamie sank down gratefully, I surveyed our back trail. No immediate signs of pursuit, but that didn't mean much in these woods. Vince struck me as the patient type, a hunter who would track his prey methodically rather than rush. I checked the rifle again. 5 rounds remaining. My pistol was fully loaded with 15. Enough ammunition, but I hoped desperately that it wouldn't come to a firefight with a child present. Here, I said, offering Jamie my water bottle and the last of my energy bar. Eat this. We need to keep your strength up. As he ate, I studied the map. The canyon lay about a mile ahead. Its steep walls would funnel us toward the only crossing, an old footbridge that rangers used for patrols. It was our quickest route to safety, but also an obvious choke point. Vince would know this. Jamie, I said gently, I need to ask you some questions about the men who took you. It's important. He nodded, his eyes solemn beyond his years. How many were there in total? Did you see others besides the 3 we encountered? 5, he answered without hesitation. The 3 from last night, plus 2 others who stayed at the camp. They had a truck hidden somewhere. I heard them talking about it. 5 poachers. 2 unaccounted for. The situation was worse than I'd thought. Did you hear anything about why they took you, or what they're hunting? Jamie's face darkened. They weren't just hunting animals. His voice broke. They said my dad saw something he shouldn't have. By the lake. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. What did your dad see, Jamie? I don't know for sure, but I heard them talking about the shipment and how they needed to clean up before the buyers arrived. The pieces were falling into place. Blackwood National Forest bordered Canada, a remote, largely unpatrolled border. The poaching operation was likely a cover for something much bigger. We need to move, I said, suddenly feeling exposed. The bridge isn't far. As we set off again, the forest thinned, giving way to the rocky approach to the canyon. The sound of rushing water grew louder. The river was swollen with autumn rains, churning 50 feet below where the bridge spanned the gap. We reached the canyon edge and paused. The bridge, a simple suspension structure of wood and cable, swayed slightly in the morning breeze. On the other side lay the path to the ranger station, to safety. I'm scared, Jamie admitted, looking at the narrow bridge. I know, I said, but I'll be right behind you. Just take it slow and steady. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the wooden planks. I followed, the rifle slung across my back, my hand ready at my pistol. We were halfway across when I heard it, the distinctive metallic click of a rifle being readied. That's far enough, called a voice I didn't recognize. 2 men emerged from the trees on the far side of the canyon, the remaining poachers Jamie had mentioned. Both carried hunting rifles aimed directly at us. Turn around, ordered the taller one, a gaunt man with a face weathered by years in the wilderness. Back the way you came. I placed my hand protectively on Jamie's shoulder, my mind racing through options, each worse than the last. To retreat meant facing Vince and Evans. To advance meant walking into the rifles of these 2. To stay on the bridge left us exposed from both sides. It's over, I called back. Your operation is finished. We know about the smuggling. The border patrol is already on their way. A bluff, but I needed to buy time. The gaunt man laughed. Nice try, Ranger. No one's coming. Your radio hasn't worked since you entered the Shadow Plains. Our jammers saw to that. So that explained the equipment outage. This was indeed something much bigger than poaching. Let the boy go, I tried. He's innocent in all this. Can't do that, the man replied. He's seen too much, just like his father. At the mention of his father, Jamie tensed beside me. I squeezed his shoulder gently, willing him to stay calm. A shout from behind made me turn. Vince and Evans had emerged from the trees on our side of the canyon. We were trapped on the bridge, exposed from both directions. Nowhere left to run, Ranger, Vince called, a smile spreading across his face as he raised his rifle. In that moment, with the morning sun rising over the canyon, time seemed to slow. I had a split second to make an impossible choice. I looked down at Jamie, saw the terror in his eyes, and knew what I had to do. "Jamie," I whispered urgently, "do you trust me?" He nodded. "When I say now, hold your breath and go limp. Don't fight me. Understand?" Another nod, his eyes wide but resolute. I raised my voice, addressing Vince. "You're right, nowhere to run." I lowered my weapons slowly to the bridge planks. "I'm surrendering. Just don't harm the boy." Vince grinned triumphantly, lowering his rifle slightly as he stepped onto the bridge. "Smart choice, Ranger." As he approached, I tensed, waiting for the perfect moment. When he was just 10 feet away, I acted. "Now!" I shouted, grabbing Jamie around the waist. Before any of the poachers could react, I vaulted over the side of the bridge, taking Jamie with me in a controlled fall toward the churning river below. The shock of the cold water was like a physical blow, but I kept my grip on Jamie, guiding us into the strongest part of the current that swept us rapidly away from the bridge. Above, I heard shouts and saw muzzle flashes as the poachers fired blindly into the water. But the current had already carried us around a bend in the canyon, out of their line of sight. I pulled Jamie to the surface, ensuring he could breathe. The boy gasped and sputtered, but remained admirably calm. "Hold on to me," I instructed. "Don't fight the current. We'll ride it downstream until it's safe to get out." The river carried us nearly a mile before widening into calmer waters, where we could safely make our way to shore. Both exhausted and soaked, we dragged ourselves onto a sandy bank beneath the shelter of overhanging willows. "Are they coming?" Jamie asked, shivering in the morning air. I scanned the riverbanks and listened carefully. "I don't think so. They'd have to go around the canyon to follow us downriver. That buys us some time." I checked my watch, miraculously still functioning despite the dunking. It was just past 8:30 a.m. The ranger station was still 3 miles away, but we were past the worst of the terrain. "We need to keep moving," I said, helping Jamie to his feet. "Just a little further." We followed the river for half a mile before cutting inland toward the station. The forest here was more managed, with clear fire breaks and trail markers. Civilization was near. As we crested a final ridge, the ranger station came into view, a small cluster of buildings in a clearing with several Forest Service vehicles parked outside. And more importantly, people, my colleagues, moving about their morning duties. "We made it," I breathed, relief washing over me. Jamie looked up at me, his face showing the first real hope since I'd found him. "What happens now?" I knelt down to his level. "Now you're safe. We'll call the police, the FBI, everyone we need to bring these men to justice, and we'll find your mom." "And my dad?" he asked quietly. I couldn't lie to him. "I don't know, Jamie, but whatever happened, you survived. You were brave and strong, and you never gave up. Your dad would be proud." A tear slid down his cheek, but he straightened his shoulders and nodded. As we walked the final distance to the station, I glanced back at the vast wilderness behind us. The Shadow Plains lived up to their name, harboring darkness that went beyond mere legend. But even in that darkness, light could prevail. Jamie's small hand found mine as we approached the station. In that moment, I knew that whatever dangers still lurked in those woods, whatever threat the poachers and their operation posed, we would face it together. The shadows had not claimed us. Dawn had broken, and with it came the promise of justice. I first noticed them in 2019, during those formative years when the mind is still sorting reality from imagination. I was only 7 when my family relocated to Bakersfield for my father's new position at the regional hospital. The desert heat was oppressive that summer, distorting the horizon with wavering mirages that seemed to breathe like living things. Perhaps that's why I didn't question what I saw at first. A tall, unnaturally thin silhouette standing beside our mailbox as we pulled into the driveway of our new home. "Did you see that person?" I asked my mother, pointing toward the spot where the figure had been moments before. She glanced over distractedly while unbuckling my younger brother. "There's nobody there, honey. Why don't you help carry some of these grocery bags inside?" I remember standing in that driveway, plastic bags cutting into my small fingers, staring at the empty space where I'd seen something. Someone. moments before. The memory stays with me because it marked the beginning. Our new house was a single-story ranch style with large windows that seemed to collect darkness rather than dispel it. My bedroom faced the backyard, with an old oak tree that cast spiderweb shadows across my walls when moonlight filtered through its branches. 3 nights after moving in, I woke without knowing why. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:17 a.m., its red numbers the only illumination in the room. Except that wasn't entirely true. In the corner, between my closet and the wall, stood a darker patch of darkness. It had shape humanoid but wrong in subtle ways I couldn't articulate at that age. It was tall, reaching nearly to the ceiling, and completely still. I didn't scream. Something about its presence suggested that screaming would make things worse. Instead, I pulled my blanket over my head and counted to 100, certain that when I emerged it would be gone. It was. But the next night, I felt it again, that peculiar awareness that something was watching me. Not necessarily with malice, but with an attention so focused it felt like pressure against my skin. This time I didn't see it directly, just caught a peripheral glimpse of movement when I walked to the bathroom, a suggestion of something tall and thin slipping around the corner. Within a month, these occurrences became frequent enough that I developed routines to cope. I refused to look directly at mirrors after sunset. I kept nightlights plugged into every available outlet. I learned to recognize the subtle shift in air pressure that preceded their appearances. My parents attributed my new behaviors to adjustment anxiety. Moving is hard on children, the school counselor told them during a parent-teacher conference. Gregory is simply processing change in his own way. But it wasn't just change I was processing, it was them. The silhouettes, the watchers, the things that weren't supposed to be there but persisted anyway, defying adult explanations of just shadows or overactive imagination. By the end of our first year in Bakersfield, I had identified patterns. They appeared most often at night, but occasionally manifested in broad daylight, standing in places where shadows shouldn't logically fall. They varied in height and proportion, though the tallest, nearly 7 feet by my estimation, seemed to appear with the most consistency. They never spoke or made sound. They never touched me or moved objects. They simply observed. And somehow that was worse than any supernatural harassment could have been. As childhood gave way to adolescence, I began seeking explanations beyond the dismissals of adults. The summer I turned 12, I spent weeks at the public library researching visual hallucinations, rare neurological conditions, and the psychology of fear. I read about shadow people, hypnagogic hallucinations, and sleep paralysis, none of which perfectly matched my experiences, but offered potential frameworks for understanding. What troubled me most wasn't the presence of these figures, but their persistence across environments. We moved 3 times during my years in Bakersfield, from the ranch house to an apartment complex, then to a newer subdivision across town, and the silhouettes followed without interruption. The tallest one, whom I'd begun thinking of as the Sentinel, never allowed, as naming it seemed dangerous somehow, became increasingly prevalent. While the others appeared sporadically, the Sentinel maintained a constant if irregular presence in my life. I would sense it standing behind me during mundane activities, doing homework, playing video games, brushing my teeth. The pressure of its attention would build until I felt compelled to turn around, only to catch the barest suggestion of movement at the edge of my vision. My interest in photography developed partly as an attempt to capture evidence. By 14, I'd saved enough from odd jobs to purchase a decent digital camera. I set up motion-activated recordings in my bedroom, positioned cameras at angles to capture the corners where they most frequently appeared, and experimented with different light settings. The results were uniformly disappointing. Either nothing appeared on film, or lens flares and digital artifacts created false positives that only undermined my credibility when I showed the results to others. The summer before high school, I met Wyatt at a community swimming pool. We bonded over shared interests in science fiction and horror films, and eventually, I confided in him about the silhouettes. Unlike my parents, who had grown increasingly concerned about my fixation, or the school counselor who suggested anxiety medication, Wyatt listened without judgment. Maybe they're interdimensional beings, he suggested one afternoon as we sat in his basement playing video games. Like they exist partially in our reality but can't fully manifest. They feel real, I said. Not like ghosts or anything supernatural. More like they've always been here and most people just can't see them. Wyatt considered this. Have you ever tried communicating with them? The question sent an involuntary shiver through me. No, that feels dangerous. But they've never hurt you, right? They just watch. So far, I admitted. But there's something about them that feels patient, like they're waiting for something specific. That conversation with Wyatt marked a turning point. While I'd previously focused on documenting and avoiding the silhouettes, I began considering more direct approaches. Not communication, that still felt like crossing a dangerous threshold, but controlled observation. I started keeping a detailed journal documenting every appearance, including environmental factors like time, weather, my emotional state, and recent activities. Patterns emerged. The appearances increased during periods of emotional stress. They clustered around significant life changes. The sentinel, in particular, seemed to manifest most strongly when I felt vulnerable or was making important decisions. My high school years brought a temporary decrease in sightings. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, filling my schedule so completely that exhaustion guaranteed dreamless sleep most nights. The silhouettes never disappeared entirely, but their presence faded to background noise, a flicker in peripheral vision here, a momentary sense of being watched there. I convinced myself I was outgrowing whatever phenomenon had plagued my childhood. Perhaps it had been stress or an unusual form of migraine aura all along. Perhaps the human mind simply found patterns in randomness until we trained it not to. Then came the night of my high school graduation, and everything changed. My graduation night should have been celebratory. I had finished in the top 10% of my class, secured a partial scholarship to State University, and finally felt I was leaving behind the strangeness of my childhood. My parents hosted a small gathering at our home, just family and a few close friends, including Wyatt, who had become something of a confidant regarding the silhouettes, though I rarely mentioned them anymore. The evening progressed normally until around 11, when guests began departing. I stepped onto our back porch for some air, leaning against the railing to gaze at the stars. The night was clear and unseasonably cool for June, creating that peculiar desert silence where sound seems to travel forever. I felt it before I saw anything, that familiar pressure of attention, like the air itself was suddenly dense with observation. Turning slowly, I saw the sentinel standing at the far end of the porch, more clearly defined than I had ever seen it before. The silhouette was precisely that, a human-shaped void that seemed to absorb rather than block light. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, proportioned like a person who had been stretched slightly in all dimensions. For the first time in years, I didn't look away or retreat indoors. Something about crossing the threshold into adulthood had emboldened me. I stared directly at it and spoke aloud. "What do you want from me?" The figure remained motionless, but the quality of its attention changed. I felt a shift in pressure, as though it were considering me with greater intensity. Then, without any visible movement, it was suddenly closer, not by walking or gliding, but by simply occupying a different position in space. Now it stood merely 10 feet away. My courage evaporated. I backed toward the door, heart hammering against my ribs with such force I thought it might bruise. As my hand found the doorknob, the sentinel tilted what appeared to be its head, a gesture so human it was more terrifying than anything overtly monstrous could have been. I retreated inside and spent the remainder of the night with my bedroom door locked, lights blazing. When morning came, I convinced myself I had imagined the entire encounter, a product of stress and nostalgia combined with too much graduation cake. But the incident marked the end of my reprieve. Throughout that summer, the silhouettes returned with increasing frequency and clarity. The sentinel, in particular, seemed more present than ever before, manifesting not just in quiet moments at home but in public spaces, standing among trees in the park, positioned at the far end of grocery store aisles, visible through the windows of passing buses. When autumn came and I left for university, I harbored a desperate hope that physical distance might sever whatever connection bound these entities to me. The campus was nearly 300 miles from Bakersfield, in a greener, wetter climate that felt worlds away from the desert landscape of my youth. For almost 2 weeks, I experienced nothing unusual. I settled into my dormitory, attended orientation events, and began classes with a sense of genuine optimism. My roommate, Jordan, was a quiet engineering major who spent most of his time at the library, giving me welcome privacy in our shared space. Then came the night I returned late from a study group. The residency hall was unusually quiet, most students already asleep or still out enjoying weekend activities. As I approached my door, key in hand, I felt that unmistakable sensation of being observed. Looking down the hallway, I saw the sentinel standing by the emergency exit, its featureless form unmistakable even in the dim lighting. "No," I whispered, the word half plea and half command. "Not here." The figure remained motionless, but I sensed what felt almost like acknowledgement, as though my recognition had been noted and recorded. Then, between one blink and the next, it was gone. I told myself it had been a trick of light and shadow, fatigue playing on old fears. But in the weeks that followed, the silhouettes became fixtures of my college experience. They appeared in lecture halls, standing in corners while professors delivered lessons on literature or calculus. They lingered in the spaces between bookshelves in the library, visible just beyond study carrels. The sentinel took to appearing in my dormitory room, standing silently in the corner while I pretended to sleep. My academic performance suffered. Constant vigilance left me exhausted, jumping at shadows both real and imagined. I began avoiding social gatherings, knowing from experience that emotional intensity seemed to attract their presence. Isolation, however, only made things worse. In the absence of human interaction, the silhouettes became my primary company. By mid-semester, Jordan had requested a room change, citing my weird behavior and tendency to stare at empty corners for extended periods. I couldn't blame him. From an outside perspective, I must have appeared increasingly unstable. The University Counseling Center suggested anxiety medication and regular therapy. I attended 3 sessions before giving up. How could I explain that the problem wasn't internal anxiety, but external observation by entities no one else could see? The counselor's concerned expression when I attempted to describe the silhouettes told me everything I needed to know about how such revelations would be received. Instead, I developed coping mechanisms. I mapped the campus according to frequency of appearances, avoiding hotspots when possible. I kept my room brightly lit at all hours. I studied in public places where the constant flow of human activity seemed to diminish their manifestations. I recorded voice memos describing my daily experiences, a practice that provided both documentation and the comfort of articulating fears that otherwise remained bottled inside. Despite these adaptations, my first year of university became a prolonged exercise in endurance rather than education. When summer arrived, I returned to Bakersfield not with the pride of academic achievement, but with the desperate hope that familiar surroundings might somehow normalize the abnormal. I was wrong. Summer in Bakersfield brought no relief. If anything, returning to the place where it all began seemed to intensify the phenomena. The silhouettes appeared with greater frequency and definition, no longer confined to corners and shadows but manifesting in broad daylight, standing in the middle of rooms with an impossible solidity that defied their incorporeal nature. My parents noticed the change in me. "You seem worse than when you left," my mother observed over dinner one evening. "Is college not working out?" How could I explain that education was the least of my concerns? That I lived in constant awareness of beings that occupied the same space as we did, but remained invisible to everyone else? That the tall one, the sentinel, had taken to standing at the foot of my bed each night, its featureless form somehow conveying expectation. "Just adjusting," I said instead. "First year is tough for everyone." My father studied me with the clinical gaze he developed through decades of medical practice. "Maybe you should talk to someone professional. There's no shame in getting help if you're struggling." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire life trying to get help, to find someone who could see what I saw, or at least believe what I reported seeing. The few who hadn't immediately dismissed me. Wyatt during our high school years, a teaching assistant in my Psychology 101 class who'd suggested temporary psychosis, had eventually backed away when the persistence of my experiences defied easy explanation. One particularly hot July afternoon, I retreated to the community pool, seeking both relief from the heat and the comfort of a public space where the silhouettes rarely manifested fully. The water was cooler than the air but still warm, providing limited refreshment. I floated on my back, eyes closed against the brutal sun, focusing on the sensation of weightlessness. When I opened my eyes, the sentinel was standing at the pool's edge, looking down at me. Not at the corner of my vision, not as a fleeting glimpse easily dismissed. It stood in plain view, apparently visible despite the dozen other people enjoying the pool around me. I jerked upright, flailing in the water, suddenly certain I was about to drown. A lifeguard's whistle blew sharply. "No horseplay!" the teenage guard called out. "Sorry," I gasped, still staring at the black figure by the pool's edge. Can you see that?" The lifeguard squinted in the direction I was pointing. "See what?" "That person, standing right there." He gave me a look that mixed concern with annoyance. "There's nobody there, man. Maybe you've been in the sun too long." I looked back. The sentinel remained, unmoved by our exchange. For the first time, I noticed details that had previously been obscured. The silhouette wasn't simply human-shaped, but precisely formed, with a suggestion of clothing, a jacket or coat that hung to mid-thigh, and what might have been the brim of a hat shadowing where a face should be. I climbed out of the pool immediately, gathered my belongings, and left without looking back. The walk home became a surreal journey of hyper-awareness. The sentinel followed at a consistent distance, always visible when I glanced back but never seeming to actually move. It simply occupied different positions along my route, maintaining the same separation regardless of how I varied my pace. By the time I reached my parents' house, I was running. I burst through the front door, startling my mother who was preparing dinner in the kitchen. "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed by my evident distress. "Nothing," I lied, moving quickly toward my bedroom. "Just thought I might get caught in rain." The absurdity of the excuse rain in Bakersfield in July didn't register until later. I locked my bedroom door, closed the blinds, and collapsed onto my bed, breathing heavily. For nearly an hour, I lay perfectly still, listening for any sound that might indicate the sentinel had somehow followed me inside. Eventually, hunger and thirst drew me out. The house was quiet. A note on the counter informed me my parents had gone to a dinner party with colleagues. I made a sandwich with shaking hands, then returned to my room, leaving every light on in my wake. As I pushed open my bedroom door, the sandwich fell from my nerveless fingers. The sentinel stood in the center of the room, more clearly defined than I had ever seen it. In the harsh light of my bedside lamp, details emerged that had previously been obscured by shadow and distance. The figure wore what appeared to be an old-fashioned suit, its fabric absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Where its face should have been, there was only a deeper darkness, a void that seemed to draw my gaze inexorably inward. For the first time in all the years of observation, the sentinel moved while I watched. It raised one impossibly thin arm, extending what might have been a hand toward me in a gesture that could have been either greeting or warning. I fled the house without conscious thought, running until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. I found myself in a park several blocks away, surrounded by families enjoying the cooling evening air, children laughing on swings, couples walking dogs. Normal people living normal lives unmarked by the presence of impossible watchers. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from my mother asking where I'd gone. I couldn't bring myself to return home, not with the certainty of what awaited me there. Instead, I called Wyatt, my voice breaking as I asked if I could stay the night. "Are they back?" he asked simply. "They never left," I replied, "but it's worse now. Much worse." That night, sleeping on Wyatt's couch, I experienced something new. Not the presence of the silhouettes, but their complete absence. For the first time in recent memory, I felt truly alone in a room, unwatched and unobserved. The relief was so profound I wept silently in the darkness, great soundless sobs that eventually gave way to the deepest sleep I'd had in years. The respite proved temporary. By morning, the familiar pressure had returned. Not in Wyatt's apartment, but waiting just outside, patient and persistent as always. The remainder of that summer passed in a haze of avoidance and deteriorating mental stability. I spent as much time as possible in crowded public places, discovered that certain locations seemed to inhibit the silhouette's appearance, and developed an almost superstitious reliance on routine. My parents' concern grew increasingly difficult to deflect, especially after I refused to return to university for the fall semester, citing vague health concerns. In October, my cousin Ivy came to stay with us. 7 years my senior, and studying for her doctorate in clinical psychology, she had always been more of a mentor than a peer. Her visit was ostensibly to conduct research at the regional hospital where my father worked, but I suspected my parents had orchestrated it out of worry for my increasingly erratic behavior. Ivy arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, bringing with her the brisk efficiency that had characterized her approach to life for as long as I could remember. She unpacked in our guest room, joined us for dinner, and waited until my parents had retired for the evening before cornering me in the kitchen. "Your mom is worried about you," she said without preamble, leaning against the counter while I pretended to be fascinated by the contents of the refrigerator. "Mom worries about everything," I replied, selecting an apple I had no intention of eating. "She says you've been seeing things." I closed the refrigerator with more force than necessary. "Did she ask you to evaluate me? Is that why you're really here?" Ivy's expression softened. "No one asked me to do anything, but I care about you, and yes, I'm concerned. You've withdrawn from school, barely leave the house except to visit very specific locations at very specific times, and you've been observed having conversations with empty rooms." "I don't talk to them," I said before I could stop myself. Ivy's eyebrows rose. "Them?" The exhaustion of carrying my secrets suddenly overwhelmed me. I sank into a kitchen chair, the apple rolling forgotten across the table. "The silhouettes, the watchers. They've been with me since we moved to Bakersfield when I was 7. Everyone thinks I'm hallucinating or seeking attention or developing schizophrenia, but they're real, Ivy. They're as real as you are." I expected disbelief, concern, or the careful neutrality mental health professionals cultivate when confronted with delusions. Instead, Ivy sat down across from me, her expression thoughtful. "Describe them to me," she said simply. For the next hour, I detailed everything: their appearances, behaviors, the increasing clarity and frequency of their manifestations, my various coping mechanisms, and the particular persistence of the sentinel. Ivy listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small journal she produced from her pocket. When I finally fell silent, she studied me for a long moment. "I'd like to stay in your room tonight." "What? Why?" "If these entities are as consistent as you describe, I want to observe the conditions under which you perceive them. It's not that I don't believe you," she added quickly, "but external validation might help us determine what we're dealing with." The idea of having someone else present during one of the Sentinel's nightly vigils was both terrifying and desperately appealing. "They might not appear if you're there," I warned. Ivy shrugged. "Then we'll have learned something about their behavior, and if they do appear and I can't perceive them, we'll have learned something else." That night, we arranged a makeshift sleeping area for Ivy, an air mattress positioned near my desk, leaving the space by my closet conspicuously open. It was there, in that precise corner, that the Sentinel most frequently manifested during the night hours. "Do they usually appear at specific times?" Ivy asked as we prepared for bed. "The Sentinel comes most reliably between 2 and 4 in the morning," I said. "The others are less predictable." Ivy nodded, setting an alarm on her phone. "Then we'll wait." We left a single lamp on, its warm glow casting long shadows across the room. Despite my exhaustion, sleep evaded me. I lay rigid beneath my blankets, hyper-aware of Ivy's presence in the empty corner where I expected the Sentinel to appear. Ivy herself seemed remarkably calm, occasionally making notes in her journal or checking the time on her phone. At 2:37 a.m., the familiar pressure descended. The air in the room seemed to thicken, becoming dense with attention. I sat up slowly, my gaze drawn inevitably to the corner. The Sentinel stood there, more clearly defined than ever before. Its suit for it was definitely wearing an old-fashioned suit with wide lapels and what might have been a waistcoat. Absorbed light in a way that created an outline of deeper darkness against the shadowed wall. Its head tilted slightly, regarding me with the same patient intensity I had felt for years. "It's here," I whispered, not daring to look away. "In the corner by the closet." Ivy followed my gaze, her expression neutral. "I don't see anything," she said softly. But the temperature in the room just dropped significantly. She was right. My breath now fogged slightly in the suddenly chilled air. As we watched, the lamp on my desk flickered, dimming momentarily before brightening again. Does that usually happen? Ivy asked, her clinical detachment wavering slightly. No, I replied, my voice barely audible. This is new. The sentinel remained motionless, but I sensed a shift in its attention, from me to Ivy, then back again. The pressure in the room intensified until my ears popped painfully. The lamp flickered more violently, then went out entirely, plunging us into darkness broken only by the faint moonlight filtering through the blinds. In that dimness, the sentinel was paradoxically more visible, its absolute blackness standing out against the merely dark room. It took a step forward, an actual, perceivable movement rather than the usual instantaneous repositioning. Ivy's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. You can see it, I said. Not a question. Yes, she whispered. God help me, I can see it. The sentinel took another step, now fully emerged from the corner, its impossible height forcing it to stoop slightly beneath the ceiling. Its arms hung at its sides, too long for its torso, fingers extending well past where human knees would be. Ivy fumbled for her phone, activating the flashlight function. The beam caught the sentinel directly, illuminating nothing. The light passed through the space where the figure stood, casting normal shadows on the wall behind it. Yet the silhouette remained visible, unaffected by the light that should have dispelled it. What does it want? Ivy asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the evident impossibility before us. Before I could answer, the temperature plummeted further. Frost formed on the windows, spreading in crystalline patterns across the glass. The sentinel raised one elongated arm, pointing not at me, but at Ivy herself. What happened next remains difficult to describe, even years later. The air around the sentinel seemed to ripple, distorting like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The silhouette itself became momentarily indistinct, its edges blurring before resolving into sharper definition than before. And then, impossibly, it spoke, not with an audible voice, but with a pressure against our minds that formed words without sound. Observer. The impression was clear despite the absence of actual sound. The sentinel was addressing Ivy, acknowledging her role as witness. Not for you. Ivy's phone died abruptly, plunging us back into near darkness. She gasped, dropping the device as though it had burned her fingers. What is happening? She demanded, fear finally breaking through her professional composure. The sentinel turned its attention back to me, and I felt the familiar weight of its regard, but now intensified, focused like a spotlight on my consciousness. Soon. With that final impression, the silhouette began to fade, not by walking away or disappearing suddenly, but by thinning gradually into transparency. Within moments, the corner was empty again, and the temperature in the room began slowly rising to normal. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The lamp on my desk came back on without warning, making us both jump. Ivy's phone remained dead, unresponsive to her attempts to restart it. That was not a hallucination, she finally said, her voice shaking slightly. That was not sleep paralysis or temporal lobe epilepsy or any other neurological explanation I might have offered. No, I agreed. It wasn't. Ivy ran her hands through her hair, a gesture of profound distress I had never seen from her before. It communicated. It recognized me as an observer and rejected my presence. It's never spoken before, I said. Not in all these years. And what did it mean by soon? She asked. I had no answer for her. We remained awake for the rest of the night, the lamp burning brightly between us, both afraid to acknowledge the fundamental shift that had occurred, not just in the behavior of the sentinel, but in our understanding of reality itself. By morning, exhaustion had dulled the edges of terror, replacing it with a numbed acceptance. Ivy's phone mysteriously powered back on around sunrise, revealing no physical damage, but a completely drained battery, despite having been nearly fully charged the night before. Over breakfast, we spoke in careful, measured terms about what we had witnessed. My parents, noting our evident fatigue, assumed we had stayed up late talking and teased us gently about slumber party regrets. I need to document this, Ivy said once we were alone again. Not for publication, she added quickly, seeing my expression, but for my own understanding. For yours too, perhaps. They'll think we're both crazy, I warned. Ivy's smile was grim. Probably, but I know what I saw, what I felt. That was not a product of shared delusion or suggestion. For the remainder of her visit, our dynamics shifted. No longer was she the concerned professional evaluating a troubled relative. We had become collaborators in an investigation of the inexplicable. We set up monitoring equipment in my room, temperature sensors, motion detectors, audio recorders, and Ivy began researching similar phenomena reported throughout history. The silhouettes continued to appear, though the Sentinel maintained a peculiar distance after that night, manifesting at the periphery of rooms rather than in its usual positions. The other figures, however, seemed to multiply, appearing with increasing frequency in all parts of the house. By the time Ivy was scheduled to depart, a week after our shared experience, the phenomena had intensified to previously unknown levels. Objects moved without being touched. Electronic devices malfunctioned regularly. The temperature fluctuations became so pronounced that my parents called in heating specialists, who found nothing wrong with the system. "I don't want to leave you alone with this," Ivy said as she packed her belongings. "Come back with me to Boston. Whatever these things are, they seem localized to Bakersfield." But we both knew that wasn't true. The silhouettes had followed me to university hundreds of miles away. They had been with me since childhood, across multiple homes and locations. They weren't bound to a place, but to me personally. "I need to understand why," I told her. "Running won't solve anything." Ivy hesitated, then pressed a small object into my hand, a digital voice recorder. "Keep this with you. Document everything, no matter how insignificant it seems. I'll continue researching on my end." She hugged me tightly before leaving, an uncharacteristic display of physical affection that communicated more than words could have. We both understood that something fundamental had changed, that the boundary between observer and observed had somehow been breached. That night, alone in my room for the first time since Ivy's arrival, I waited for the Sentinel's inevitable appearance. The corner remained empty, but the pressure of attention was palpable, filling the room like invisible smoke. "What do you want?" I asked aloud, addressing the emptiness directly. "Why have you been watching me all these years?" No response came, but the sensation of being observed intensified until it became almost physically painful. I activated Ivy's voice recorder, placing it on my nightstand. "October 17th, 2021, I spoke clearly. "First night after Ivy's departure. Presence felt but no visual manifestation yet. Temperature normal. No electronic disturbances." As if in response to my documentation, the lamp beside my bed flickered violently. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that my breath clouded before my face, and in the corner, the Sentinel finally appeared, but different than before. Its silhouette seemed more substantial, less a void and more a presence with weight and dimension. It raised one elongated arm, pointing directly at me as it had pointed at Ivy a week earlier. The pressure in my mind formed words without sound, clearer and more distinct than before. Preparation complete. Threshold approaching. "What threshold?" I demanded, fear giving way to a sudden, irrational anger. "What have you been preparing for?" The Sentinel's response came not as words but as a series of impressions. Rapid, disjointed images that flashed through my mind too quickly to fully comprehend. I caught glimpses of places I had never been, faces I didn't recognize, events that seemed both historical and futuristic simultaneously. When the barrage ended, I was lying on the floor, nose bleeding, the voice recorder clutched so tightly in my hand that my fingers had cramped. The Sentinel was gone, but its final impression lingered in my consciousness. Convergence imminent. The weeks following Ivy's departure marked a period of accelerating phenomena and deteriorating stability. The silhouettes appeared with increasing frequency and clarity, no longer confined to specific times or locations, but manifesting throughout my daily activities. The Sentinel, having broken its long silence, continued to communicate in its peculiar nonverbal manner, sending bursts of incomprehensible impressions that left me disoriented and physically drained. My parents' concern evolved into active intervention. They scheduled appointments with neurologists, psychiatrists, sleep specialists, each of whom offered different diagnoses and treatment options. Temporal lobe epilepsy, persistent complex visual hallucinations, narcolepsy with hypnagogic features. None seemed to fully account for my experiences, particularly after standard medications failed to produce any reduction in symptoms. I began conducting my own research, compiling information from sources both conventional and esoteric, academic journals on perception disorders, parapsychology databases, historical accounts of shadow figures across cultures. The patterns I discovered were simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring because they confirmed I wasn't alone in my experiences. Terrifying because no conclusive explanation or resolution had ever been documented. Ivy remained my primary ally during this period, our daily phone conversations providing both emotional support and intellectual framework. Her academic connections gave her access to research materials I couldn't obtain independently, while my direct experiences offered data she couldn't gather any other way. The patterns suggest threshold events, she told me during one late-night call. Periods when perception shifts, allowing awareness of phenomena normally filtered out by ordinary consciousness. But why me? I asked, watching the sentinel stand motionless in my doorway as we spoke. Why has it been following me specifically for all these years? Ivy's response was measured, her academic training evident in her careful phrasing. Historical accounts suggest certain individuals serve as focal points or bridges between different states of reality. The consistent observation you've experienced might be preparation for some form of transition or communication. The sentinel used those exact words, I reminded her. Preparation, threshold, convergence. Then perhaps we should consider taking its communications more literally than metaphorically, Ivy suggested. If these entities exist in a state adjacent to our normal perception, they may be attempting to establish more direct contact through a receptive individual. The sentinel tilted its featureless head as though listening to our conversation. Though it had no visible eyes, I felt its attention shift momentarily from me to the phone in my hand. It's here now, I told Ivy quietly. Listening to us. Try asking it directly, she suggested. Now that it's established communication, we should attempt to understand its intentions. I took a deep breath, addressing the silhouette directly. What is the convergence you mentioned? What is going to happen? For several seconds, nothing changed. The sentinel remained motionless in the doorway, its absolute blackness contrasting sharply with the well-lit hallway behind it. Then slowly, it raised one elongated arm, pointing not at me, but at the calendar hanging on my wall. Soon. The impression formed in my mind with such force that I gasped, nearly dropping the phone. It indicated the calendar, I told Ivy, and projected the word soon again. Ask for specifics, Ivy urged. When exactly? What exactly? But the sentinel was already fading, its form becoming transparent before disappearing entirely. The pressure of its attention lingered briefly, then withdrew, leaving the room feeling suddenly emptier than mere physical absence could explain. It's gone, I said, disappointment evident in my voice. They never stay long once direct interaction begins. Ivy was silent for a moment, the sound of her typing audible in the background. Check your calendar, she finally said. See if there's anything marked that might be significant. I crossed to the wall calendar, a generic monthly planner showing November 2021. Nothing notable was marked on any of the dates, just routine appointments and reminders. I was about to turn away when I noticed something unusual. A small, dark smudge on November 17th, exactly 1 month after Ivy's departure. Examining it more closely, I realized it wasn't a smudge but a tiny, perfectly formed silhouette, no larger than a fingerprint, appearing to have been drawn directly onto the paper in some impossibly dark substance. November 17th, I told Ivy, a chill running through me despite the room's comfortable temperature. There's a mark on that date, a miniature version of the silhouettes. That's less than 2 weeks away, Ivy noted, her voice betraying concern despite her attempt at clinical detachment. Do you think that's when this convergence is supposed to occur? I don't know, I admitted, but it feels significant. They've never interacted with physical objects before, never left tangible evidence of their presence. I'm coming back, Ivy decided abruptly. Whatever is happening, you shouldn't face it alone. I can arrange for emergency leave from my program. Part of me wanted desperately to accept her offer of support and companionship. But another part, the part that had observed the Sentinel's reaction to her previous involvement, hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea, I said slowly. Remember what it said when it saw you? Not for you. I think your presence might complicate whatever process is underway. Ivy's frustration was evident even through the phone. So I'm just supposed to sit hundreds of miles away while you experience some kind of interdimensional event with entities we barely understand? For now, yes, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. At least until we have more information. Keep researching on your end. I'll document everything that happens here. Our conversation ended with reluctant agreement to maintain distance until we had greater clarity about the approaching date. In the days that followed, I established a rigorous documentation protocol, recording all manifestations of the silhouettes, their behaviors, and any communications, however fragmentary. I installed additional monitoring equipment in my bedroom, including an infrared camera Ivy had shipped overnight from a parapsychology laboratory at her university. The silhouettes responded to this increased scrutiny with apparent approval. Rather than avoiding the monitoring equipment as I had half expected, they seemed to interact with it deliberately, manifesting directly in front of cameras, causing measurable temperature fluctuations when sensors were active, even affecting electromagnetic readings in patterns that, according to Ivy's analysis, could not be random. The Sentinel, in particular, became almost communicative, though still in its nonverbal manner. It would appear at specific times, often when I was reviewing research materials or speaking with Ivy, and project impressions that, while still largely incomprehensible, began to form recognizable patterns. Images of astronomical alignments, sensations of boundaries becoming permeable, a recurring impression of multiple realities occupying the same space. My parents, witnessing my increasingly bizarre behavior but unable to perceive the phenomena causing it, scheduled an emergency psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist, a well-meaning woman in her 50s, listened to a carefully edited version of my experiences and promptly recommended hospitalization for observation and stabilization. I declined, resulting in a tense family meeting where my father threatened involuntary commitment if my condition continued to deteriorate. Only Ivy's intervention, her professional credentials lending weight to her suggestions of rare but documented perceptual anomalies requiring specialized assessment, prevented immediate action. As November 17th approached, the manifestations intensified beyond anything I had previously experienced. The silhouettes appeared continuously now, no longer limited to specific times or locations. They filled my peripheral vision, standing in doorways, gathered in corners, lining hallways like motionless sentinels. The original sentinel remained distinct among them, taller and more clearly defined, its attention fixed on me with unwavering focus. Sleep became nearly impossible. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were invaded by the same impressions the sentinel projected while awake. Vast cosmic geometries, overlapping dimensions, boundaries becoming permeable. I would wake gasping, my mind struggling to process concepts it had never been designed to contain. 3 days before the marked date, the phenomena expanded beyond visual manifestation. Objects throughout the house began to display subtle but unmistakable anomalies. Books rearranging themselves on shelves, electronic devices activating without human interaction, water running upward against gravity in thin rivulets along walls. My mother witnessed one such incident, a coffee cup sliding across a perfectly level table, and her reaction wavered between religious terror and scientific bafflement. My father, increasingly desperate to rationalize the inexplicable, installed carbon monoxide detectors throughout the house and scheduled comprehensive neurological examinations for the entire family. On November 16th, the day before whatever convergence awaited, I woke to find my room transformed. Every surface, walls, ceiling, furniture was covered in tiny silhouettes. Thousands of miniature black figures arranged in intricate geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. They weren't drawn or painted. They appeared to be extensions of the surfaces themselves, three-dimensional protrusions of absolute darkness. I documented everything, speaking calmly into Ivy's voice recorder despite my mounting terror. November 16th, 6:17 a.m. The manifestations have colonized physical surfaces throughout my room. Patterns suggest deliberate communication rather than random distribution. Temperature normal. No electronic disturbances currently. As I spoke, the patterns began to move, flowing across surfaces like liquid shadow. They converged on the wall opposite my bed, forming a large version of the Sentinel's silhouette, over 6 feet tall and perfectly proportioned, embedded within the wall itself rather than standing before it. The wall sentinel raised its arm in the now familiar gesture, and the largest communication yet flooded my consciousness. Threshold approaches, convergence of realities, you have been prepared as conduit, temporary bridge between states, witness and record. The intensity of the impression left me momentarily blind, ears ringing with a sound that wasn't sound. When my senses cleared, the wall was blank again, the thousands of tiny silhouettes gone as though they had never existed. Only the sentinel remained, standing in its usual corner, motionless and attentive. I called Ivy immediately, describing the experience in detail while it remained fresh in my memory. "It sounds like you're being prepared as some kind of medium or channel," she said after listening intently. "Not in the spiritualist sense, but as a point of contact between different states of reality." "But why me?" I asked for what felt like the 100th time. "Why has it been watching me since I was 7 years old?" "Maybe that's exactly it," Ivy suggested. "The long-term observation and gradual acclimation. They've been preparing you slowly, allowing your perception to adjust incrementally rather than overwhelming you all at once." The explanation made a certain intuitive sense, though it offered little comfort regarding what might occur the following day. "What should I do?" I asked, suddenly feeling very young and frightened. Ivy's response was measured but firm. "Document everything, maintain your monitoring equipment, and try to approach it with scientific curiosity rather than fear. If these entities wanted to harm you, they've had many years of opportunity." That night, I made final preparations. I charged all recording devices, positioned cameras to cover all angles of my room, and wrote detailed notes about my mental and physical state. The silhouettes gathered in unprecedented numbers, filling every corner of the house with their motionless presence. The sentinel maintained its position in my room, watching as I worked with what I interpreted as approval. My parents, sensing my increasing agitation but unable to perceive its cause, suggested I join them for dinner out, a transparent attempt to remove me from the environment they believed was contributing to my deterioration. I declined as gently as possible, knowing that separation from the convergence point would be counterproductive at this critical juncture. When midnight approached, marking the transition to November 17th, I positioned myself in the center of my room, recording devices active, notebook open on my lap. The sentinel stood directly before me now, closer than it had ever been, its featureless form somehow conveying anticipation. "I'm ready," I said aloud, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Show me what this convergence is." The response came not from the sentinel, but from every silhouette simultaneously, their collective attention focusing on me with such intensity that it became a physical pressure against my skin. The air in the room began to vibrate at frequencies just below audibility, creating a sensation of movement without sound. And then, as November 17th officially began, everything changed. The transformation began subtly, a slight intensification of colors, a sharpening of edges, sounds acquiring additional harmonic layers. Then reality itself seemed to expand, not by revealing new physical space, but by adding dimensions to existing space. The walls of my room remained where they had always been, but they simultaneously extended in directions I couldn't name, revealing aspects previously hidden from human perception. The silhouettes, which had always appeared as two-dimensional voids against three-dimensional space, now revealed their true nature. They weren't shadows or projections, but full beings existing primarily in dimensions adjacent to our own, their apparent flatness merely an artifact of how they intersected with conventional reality. The sentinel, standing before me, underwent the most dramatic transformation. Its featureless void expanded, revealing a form both humanoid and profoundly alien. A body composed of what appeared to be densely woven filaments of darkness that absorbed not just light, but possibility itself. Where a face should have been, there was a complex geometry of angles that somehow functioned as sensory organs, perceiving aspects of reality invisible to human awareness. "Convergence begins," came the impression in my mind, clearer than any previous communication. Realities align, observe, and record. The room around me began to layer, multiple versions of the same space occupying identical coordinates simultaneously. I could see my furniture as it currently existed, but also as it had existed in the past and might exist in potential futures, worn by decades of use, replaced by different pieces, arranged in configurations I had never considered. More disturbingly, I saw myself, not reflections, but actual iterations of my own body occupying the same space from different temporal perspectives. Gregory at 7, when the silhouettes first appeared. Gregory at current age, sitting cross-legged on the floor with recording devices arrayed around him. Gregory at indeterminate future ages, expressions ranging from wonder to terror to resigned acceptance. The boundaries between these overlapping realities remained distinct but permeable, allowing glimpses and partial interactions across normal limitations. Objects from one iteration affected shadows in another. Sounds produced in future versions created echoes in the present. Cause and effect became suggestions rather than absolute laws. Through it all, the silhouettes, now revealed as interdimensional beings, moved with purpose and familiarity, navigating the convergence points with practiced ease. They weren't merely observing. They were facilitating, adjusting, fine-tuning the interactions between overlapping realities. "What is this?" I gasped, struggling to maintain consciousness under the perceptual assault. "What are you showing me?" "The true nature," came the response, not just from the Sentinel, but from all the beings simultaneously. "Reality is confluence, not singularity. You exist at junction point, prepared vessel for temporary observation." The explanation, while coherent, barely scratched the surface of what I was experiencing. Reality, as I had understood it, was merely one strand in an infinitely complex weave, with countless iterations and variations existing simultaneously. The boundaries between these variations normally remained imperceptible to human consciousness, but occasionally, at specific convergence points determined by patterns beyond human comprehension, the barriers thinned enough to permit direct observation. And I, through years of gradual exposure and preparation, had been conditioned to serve as witness to this convergence without experiencing the immediate psychosis that would normally result from such fundamental perceptual expansion. As this understanding crystallized in my mind, the convergence intensified further. The overlapping realities began to exchange components, objects, energies, information, in a complex dance of quantum possibilities. My recording devices, designed to document conventional phenomena, responded erratically. Cameras captured impossible geometries. Audio recorders registered frequencies beyond their specifications. Temperature sensors fluctuated between absolute zero and values exceeding their maximum range. Through it all, I continued to document as best I could, speaking observations into recorders and scribbling notes that often trailed into illegibility as my perception shifted between temporal states. My consciousness expanded and contracted, sometimes encompassing perspectives from multiple iterations simultaneously, sometimes narrowing to specific focal points within the convergence. The Sentinel remained a constant presence, its attention focused on me with what I now recognized as something akin to scientific interest. It was monitoring my responses, adjusting the intensity of revelations to prevent complete cognitive overload. Time limitations apply, it communicated as the convergence reached what felt like maximum intensity. Human vessel cannot sustain extended awareness. Recording will persist after return to singular perception. "How long?" I managed to ask, uncertain whether I was speaking aloud or merely forming the thought. "Relative measurement meaningless in convergence. Approximately one rotation of your planet from subjective perspective." 1 day. I had 1 day to observe and document what might be the most significant revelation in human history, the fundamental multiplicity of reality itself. The pressure was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. As the hours passed, though past inadequately describes temporal progression during convergence, I observed patterns and interactions that defied conventional understanding. Quantum entanglement wasn't merely a property of subatomic particles, but a fundamental characteristic of reality at all scales. Consciousness wasn't produced by brains, but channeled through them, existing primarily in dimensions beyond physical measurement. The beings I had perceived as silhouettes were neither supernatural nor alien, but natural components of a broader reality system, performing functions analogous to maintenance or regulation. Throughout this revelatory period, I experienced moments of intense clarity alternating with periods of overwhelming confusion. The Sentinel and its companions adjusted the perceptual filters accordingly, allowing me to process and document what information I could without complete psychological fragmentation. At some point, Though temporal markers had become largely meaningless, I became aware of another presence within the convergence. Not one of the interdimensional beings, but a human consciousness partially attuned to the expanded state. With a shock of recognition that transcended normal awareness, I identified Ivy, not physically present, but somehow perceiving echoes of the convergence through our established connection. The Sentinel noticed this unexpected participant immediately. Its attention shifted briefly from me to this distant point of awareness, considering. Unintended observer, it communicated, not with disapproval, but with something like scientific curiosity. Sympathetic resonance through previous exposure, acceptable variable. I felt rather than saw Ivy's astonishment, her academic mind struggling to contextualize experiences that defied conventional frameworks. Unlike me, she hadn't undergone years of gradual preparation for this perceptual expansion. Her awareness was fragmented, incomplete, but undeniably present within the convergence field. Somehow, through means I couldn't comprehend even in my expanded state, I managed to communicate with her across this impossible distance. "It's real," I projected, uncertain whether the message would reach her coherently. "All of it, not hallucination or delusion, documented as thoroughly as possible. We'll share when convergence ends." Her response came as an impression of acknowledgement and concern, faint but distinguishable among the overwhelming sensory input of the convergence. The connection between us, tenuous but persistent, offered an unexpected anchor amidst the perceptual chaos. As the convergence progressed toward its inevitable conclusion, the Sentinel communicated a final series of impressions, not explanations or revelations, but something like instructions or suggestions for after my return to singular perception. Integration will require time. Documentation will preserve partial awareness. Future convergences possible with prepared vessel. The implication was clear. This experience, while unprecedented in my lifetime, might not be singular. The preparation I had undergone, the gradual acclimation to expanded perception, had created neural pathways that could be reactivated during future convergence events. Whether this prospect was terrifying or exhilarating, I couldn't determine even in my expanded state. The knowledge that reality itself was fundamentally different from conventional understanding, broader, more complex, less absolute, would inevitably transform how I perceived everyday existence, even after returning to normal consciousness. As the convergence began to wane, the overlapping realities slowly separating back into their respective dimensional positions, the Sentinel communicated one final impression. Witness function completed. Gratitude for voluntary participation. Integration period begins. The expanded perception didn't end abruptly but receded gradually, like an oceanic tide withdrawing from shore. Layers of reality folded back into their normal configurations, the extraordinary complexity of the convergence condensing into conventional three-dimensional space. The silhouettes, briefly revealed in their true interdimensional nature, resumed their familiar appearances as flat, featureless voids against normal backgrounds. Eventually, after what might have been hours or minutes in conventional time, I found myself sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, surrounded by recording devices and pages of nearly illegible notes. The Sentinel stood in its usual corner, once again appearing as a simple silhouette rather than the complex interdimensional being I had briefly perceived it to be. Its attention remained focused on me, but with a different quality than before. Not the patient observation of preparation, but something like professional acknowledgement between colleagues who had completed a shared task. Then, with a final impression that contained elements of both farewell and continuation, it faded from view, not instantaneously but gradually, its edges softening before disappearing entirely. The pressure of its attention withdrew for the first time in years, leaving behind a peculiar emptiness. My first coherent thought was to check the date and time. My phone indicated it was November 18th, 4:21 a.m., approximately 28 hours since the convergence had begun. An entire day had passed in what had felt simultaneously like moments and eternities. With shaking hands, I began to gather my documentation notebooks filled with observations ranging from precisely detailed to completely incomprehensible, recording devices containing whatever portions of the experience they had been able to capture with their limited technological capabilities. My body, I realized belatedly, was showing signs of severe physiological stress, dehydration, muscle fatigue, eyes burning from extended periods without blinking. I had apparently remained conscious and physically active throughout the entire convergence period, though I had no memory of basic biological functions like eating or drinking. I managed to send a text message to Ivy. "It's over. I'm alive. We'll call when able." Before collapsing onto my bed, consciousness fading rapidly as my overtaxed system demanded recovery. My last thought before sleep claimed me was not fear or confusion, but a profound sense of responsibility, to document and communicate what I had witnessed, to integrate this expanded understanding into my ongoing existence, and to prepare for the possibility that it might someday happen again. The silhouettes, I realized with certainty born of direct experience, had never been haunting me. They had been preparing me for enlightenment. I slept for nearly 20 hours after the convergence ended, waking occasionally to drink water or visit the bathroom before collapsing back into exhausted unconsciousness. My parents, alarmed by my extended seclusion, checked on me periodically but seemed relieved to find me merely sleeping rather than engaged in the increasingly bizarre behaviors they had witnessed leading up to November 17th. When I finally emerged from my room on the evening of November 19th, physically recovered but mentally still processing, I found them sitting in the living room with expressions of cautious optimism. "You look better," my mother observed, studying my face carefully. "More present." The observation was inadvertently accurate. For the first time in years, I was fully present in conventional reality, no longer dividing my attention between normal perception and awareness of the silhouettes. Their absence, for they had indeed departed completely after the convergence, created a peculiar lightness I was still adjusting to. "I feel better," I replied, choosing words carefully. "I think whatever was happening has resolved itself." My father, ever the medical professional, remained skeptical. "Just like that? Without treatment or intervention?" "Sometimes that's how these things work," I said, the inadequacy of the explanation obvious to all of us. "I can't really explain it better right now." The truth, of course, was infinitely more complex than I could possibly convey to them. How could I describe the convergence of multiple realities, the revelation of interdimensional beings whose very existence defied conventional understanding, the fundamental restructuring of my perception of reality itself? Even if I found the words, they lacked the contextual framework to process such information without dismissing it as delusional. Instead, I focused on practical recovery, re-establishing normal eating and sleeping patterns, engaging in conventional social interactions, demonstrating the behavioral stability that would reassure them. The change was dramatic enough that they accepted it as genuine improvement rather than questioning its sudden onset. 3 days after the convergence, when I had recovered sufficient physical and mental equilibrium, I called Ivy. Her response was immediate and intense. "I felt it," she said without preamble. "Not completely, not like you apparently did, but echoes, impressions. It was real, wasn't it? All of it." "Yes," I confirmed, relief flooding through me at having someone who could corroborate my experience, however partially. "More real than conventional reality in some ways. How much do you remember?" "Fragments, mostly. Overlapping perceptions. A sense of reality being infinitely more complex than we normally perceive. And," she hesitated, "a connection to you somehow. Like I was witnessing partially through your consciousness. The Sentinel, the primary entity, acknowledged your presence, called it sympathetic resonance through previous exposure. Your direct contact with them during your visit created a connection that allowed partial participation in the convergence." Ivy was silent for several moments, processing this information. "I've been analyzing the data you sent, what your equipment managed to record during the event. The results are unprecedented. Quantum fluctuations that shouldn't be possible under current understanding of physics. Audio frequencies containing embedded patterns similar to mathematical expressions but in dimensional systems beyond conventional geometry." "Can it be interpreted?" I asked. "Translated into terms others might understand?" "Partially at best," she admitted. "The instruments themselves were functioning beyond their design parameters during the convergence. Most of the scientific community would dismiss the results as equipment malfunction rather than genuine phenomena." This was the fundamental challenge I now faced: how to integrate and communicate an experience that transcended conventional frameworks of understanding. The convergence had revealed the multiplicity of reality, the limitless complexity of existence beyond our normal perceptual filters. but that revelation remained largely incommunicable through conventional means. In the weeks that followed, I worked with Ivy to organize and analyze my documentation. The notebooks contained observations ranging from precisely detailed descriptions of conventional phenomena to increasingly abstract notations as the convergence progressed, eventually deteriorating into diagrams and symbols that corresponded to no known writing system but which I could still partially interpret through the residual effects of expanded perception. The recordings proved equally challenging. Video captured by my cameras showed me sitting in my room for extended periods, occasionally writing furiously or speaking into audio recorders, but revealed none of the overlapping realities or interdimensional beings I had perceived. Audio recordings contained my voice describing phenomena that the microphones themselves couldn't detect, creating an eerie disconnection between narrative and evident reality. It's like trying to describe color to someone who has only experienced black and white, I told Ivy during one of our analysis sessions. The conceptual framework simply doesn't exist within conventional understanding. Yet you experienced it directly, she pointed out. Your neural architecture processed information that supposedly can't be processed by human consciousness. That alone is significant, regardless of how effectively it can be communicated. She was right, of course. The experience itself, the direct perception of reality's true nature, however temporarily, had fundamentally altered my understanding of existence. The knowledge that what we perceive as absolute reality is merely one strand in an infinitely complex weave couldn't be unlearned, even if it couldn't be fully articulated. 3 months after the convergence, I returned to university, resuming my academic studies with a perspective permanently altered by what I had witnessed. Courses in quantum physics and consciousness studies that had previously seemed abstract now resonated with personal significance. Theoretical frameworks that attempted to describe reality's fundamental nature appeared simultaneously more valid and more limited than before. The silhouettes never returned, at least not in their original form. Occasionally, in moments of particular focus or during transitions between wakefulness and sleep, I would experience brief perceptual expansions, glimpses of the broader reality revealed during convergence, momentary awareness of dimensions beyond conventional measurement. These episodes were fleeting, but served as reminders that the boundaries between perceptual states remained more permeable for me than for most. Ivy continued her doctoral research, subtly influenced by her partial experience of the convergence. Her dissertation on quantum consciousness and perceptual filtering incorporated elements of our shared understanding, while remaining sufficiently conventional to be academically acceptable. We maintained regular contact, collaborating on papers that approached the edges of conventional understanding without explicitly crossing into territory that would be dismissed as pseudoscientific. My parents, relieved by my apparent recovery and return to normal functioning, gradually stopped monitoring me for signs of psychological disturbance. They attributed the entire episode to a temporary stress-induced condition that had spontaneously resolved, an explanation I neither confirmed nor corrected. Some truths remain incommunicable even to those closest to us. As years passed, I developed a comfortable dual existence, functioning normally within conventional reality, while maintaining awareness of its fundamental insufficiency. The knowledge that what we perceive is merely a limited slice of a vastly more complex, multidimensional existence became integrated into my everyday understanding, influencing my choices and perspectives without dominating them. Occasionally, I would experience what I came to think of as thin spots, locations or moments where the barriers between dimensional states seemed particularly permeable. In these instances, I would feel echoes of the convergence, brief expansions of perception that allowed glimpses of the broader reality normally filtered from human awareness. During one such episode, 5 years after the original convergence, I briefly perceived the Sentinel again, not as a silhouette or even in its fully revealed interdimensional form, but as a familiar presence at the periphery of expanded consciousness. Its attention, still focused and measuring, carried an impression that might have been acknowledgement or even approval. Integration proceeding appropriately, came the familiar nonverbal communication. Potential for future participation maintained. The contact was momentary, but confirmatory. The convergence had not been a terminal event, but rather an initial exposure, perhaps the first of multiple instances where the boundaries between realities might thin enough to permit direct observation by prepared consciousness. This knowledge, while potentially unsettling, brought with it a curious peace. The silhouettes that had followed me since childhood had never been threatening or malevolent. They had been preparing me, gradually acclimating my perception to accommodate experiences beyond normal human parameters. The years of observation had been neither haunting nor harassment, but preparation for expanded understanding. Today, I continue to function within conventional reality while maintaining awareness of its limitations. I pursue research in fields adjacent to my experiences, contributing to expanded understanding where possible without claiming authoritative knowledge that would be dismissed as delusional. Ivy and I collaborate regularly, our shared partial experience of the convergence providing a foundation for exploration that straddles the boundaries between established science and emergent understanding. The silhouettes no longer manifest visibly, their preparatory function presumably completed, but I occasionally sense echoes of their presence during particularly permeable moments. These brief connections serve as reminders that reality extends infinitely beyond our normal perception, that what we accept as absolute is merely one configuration among countless possibilities. And sometimes in the moments between wakefulness and sleep, I feel the sentinel's familiar attention, not watching from corners or doorways as it once did, but present at the periphery of consciousness, a patient observer of ongoing integration and understanding. In those moments, I acknowledge its presence with neither fear nor surrender, but with the recognition that comes from shared purpose, the expansion of awareness beyond conventional limitations, the gradual revelation of reality's true nature, and the preparation for whatever convergences might yet come. The shadows that follow are not separate from us, but aspects of existence we have yet to fully perceive. Patient, persistent, and ultimately revelatory for those prepared to see. I'd always been drawn to the outdoors since childhood, finding peace among trees that city life never provided. My buddy Jack shared this passion. We'd been friends since elementary school in Toronto, back when we'd skip class to explore the ravines near our neighborhood. Over the years, those youthful adventures evolved into a sacred ritual. Every summer, we'd select a remote location, pack minimally, and disappear into nature for a weekend. As time passed, our expeditions required increasing challenges to deliver that same rush of excitement. We invented what we called hardcore camping, though surely others had coined similar terms before us. Our version meant no tents or cooking equipment, just ponchos, ground sheets, and whatever essentials we could carry on our backs. Food supplies were deliberately limited. After the initial days, we'd need to forage, fish, and live off the land if we wanted to eat. The difficulty was precisely what made it worthwhile. In the summer of 2022, when we were both 28, Jack and I selected Algonquin Provincial Park as our destination, a vast expanse of forests and lakes in Ontario, planning for 7 full days of wilderness immersion. The park sprawled across thousands of acres, offering some of the most isolated terrain in the province. Perfect for what we had in mind. "This time we're really doing it," Jack said as we packed our gear in my apartment the night before departure. "No bailouts, no shortcuts." I nodded, mentally reviewing our minimal supply list. 7 days, just us and whatever the forest provides. Jack grinned, his tall frame hunched over his backpack as he methodically arranged his items. "Remember Killarney last year, when you wanted to head back early because of those mosquitoes?" "They were the size of hummingbirds," I protested, though I knew he was right. I'd nearly given up after 3 days of endless bites and sleepless nights. "This time will be different." "It better be," Jack said, zipping his pack with finality. "I've been waiting all year for this." That evening, we reviewed our topographical maps, plotting a route that would take us deep into Algonquin's interior, far from marked trails and established campsites. Our plan was aggressive, covering significant distance each day to reach areas rarely visited by casual hikers. Sleep came fitfully that night, not from fear, but anticipation. The wilderness called to us in a way that was difficult to explain to others. Most of our friends preferred their vacations with amenities and comfort. They couldn't comprehend the appeal of voluntary hardship. But Jack and I understood what drove us into those remote places, the raw authenticity of survival, the connection to something primal and real. Morning arrived, and we loaded my aging Honda with our minimal gear. The 3-hour drive north passed with excited conversation about previous trips and expectations for this one. Jack fiddled with the radio, finally settling on classic rock that accompanied us through the increasingly rural landscape. By early afternoon, we reached the western access point of Algonquin Park. We parked near a small ranger station, signed the trail register with our expected return date, and shouldered our packs. The wait felt good, familiar, and purposeful. "Ready?" Jack asked, adjusting his shoulder straps. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the pine-scented air. Born ready. With that, we stepped onto the trail and began our journey into the wilderness. The first day unfolded exactly as planned. We hiked 12 miles from the trailhead, cutting through dense stands of pine and birch. The air hung cool around us, the sky patched with clouds that offered occasional relief from the sun. Jack set a brisk pace, his long legs carrying him effortlessly over fallen logs and across streams, while I maintained a steady rhythm behind him. As evening approached, we established camp near a shallow creek. I rigged my poncho between trees while Jack gathered wood for a small fire. We ate jerky, boiled creek water, and watched flames diminish as stars emerged overhead. The forest's quiet enveloped us, just leaf rustling and distant owl calls. This simplicity was exactly what we sought. No artificial noise, no crowds, just us embedded in wilderness. "First day down," Jack remarked, poking at the dying embers with a stick. "How are your feet holding up?" I rotated my ankles, feeling the day's exertion. "They'll be screaming tomorrow, but nothing I can't handle." "Good," he nodded, "because tomorrow gets harder." He wasn't wrong. Day 2 brought challenging terrain, a landscape of exposed roots and jagged rocks, with a steep ridge requiring careful navigation. By midday, my calves burned with exertion, and Jack's height advantage allowed him to consistently outpace me. "Hold up," I called as he disappeared around a bend for the third time that hour. "Some of us don't have giraffe legs." Jack backtracked, his expression apologetic but excited. "Sorry, man, just feeling good out here." I took a moment to catch my breath, drinking from my canteen. "We've got 5 more days. Pace yourself." That night, we slept on a flat stretch of moss. The ground radiated cold through my thin ground sheet, and I woke once to the sound of snapping twigs, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife beside me. In the moonlight, I caught a glimpse of a deer threading through trees before disappearing into darkness. By the third day, our bodies had adjusted to the rhythm of backcountry travel. Our packs lightened as food supplies dwindled, but hunger served as motivation rather than deterrent. That afternoon, Jack demonstrated his outdoor prowess by catching a small trout using improvised fishing gear, a length of paracord and a hook he'd brought specifically for this purpose. We cooked the fish over a careful fire, dividing the flaky meat with our fingers. The taste was incomparable, fresh, clean, and earned through our own efforts. We drank from fast-moving streams, water tasting better than any bottled variety money could buy. "This," Jack said, licking his fingers clean, "is what living feels like." I agreed silently, watching the forest darken around us. We consulted our map occasionally, but increasingly relied on instinct to identify potential campsites. Algonquin's vastness surrounded us, thousands of square miles of wilderness with us positioned deep within its heart, far from roads or ranger outposts. The isolation was intentional, removing all safety nets except our own skills and judgment. The 4th morning arrived with familiar routine. Jack was already awake and packing when I emerged from under my poncho. We consumed the last of our granola, shouldered our packs, and continued northward. The forest grew denser here, limiting conversation as we focused on navigation. Our footfalls created the only consistent sound in an otherwise quiet landscape. Around midday, we paused at a narrow stream to refill canteens. I knelt by the water, splashing my face to clear away sweat and grime when Jack's hand landed heavily on my shoulder. "You see that?" he asked, pointing into the distance. I squinted, following his gaze through the trees. At first, nothing registered, just more forest extending to the horizon. Then I noticed it. A shape with too many straight lines to be natural, barely visible through the foliage. Curiosity piqued, we secured our packs and moved toward the anomaly, pushing through dense underbrush. As trees thinned, the structure became unmistakable. A building stood before us, incongruous among ancient trees, specifically a church. but not as I'd ever seen one before. The structure materialized fully as we approached, and its presence sent an immediate wave of unease through me. The church walls consisted of weathered wood, gray and cracked from decades, perhaps a century, of exposure. The steep roof, covered in moss and fallen pine needles, culminated in a rusted iron cross that tilted precariously against the sky. Another cross hung over the front door, which someone had sealed with weathered boards and secured with heavy chains featuring a massive padlock. Most striking was the building's windowless design, just a worn, weathered box partially reclaimed by forest growth. No steeple punctuated its simple form. No decorative elements softened its utilitarian appearance. It looked built for functionality rather than worship. "What the hell?" I whispered, the sound carrying unnaturally in the still air. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he withdrew our topographical map from his pocket, unfolded it on the ground, and traced our route with his index finger. According to the map, nothing man-made existed within miles of our current position. "This doesn't make sense," I said, pointing to the unmarked area. "A church with no roads or paths leading to it, in the middle of Algonquin?" Jack carefully refolded the map, his eyes fixed on the building with increasing intensity. "Let's check it out." We circled the structure carefully, stepping over twisted roots and ducking low branches. The chained entrance immediately captured my attention. The thick rust coating the metal links and padlock suggested years of abandonment. But as we rounded the building's eastern side, we discovered something more intriguing. A jagged hole in the wooden wall where boards had rotted away. The opening appeared low to the ground and irregular in shape, just large enough for a person to crawl through with effort. "Probably an animal," Jack observed, crouching to peer into the darkness beyond. "Bears or wolves using it for shelter, maybe." His assessment seemed logical, but when he abruptly removed his backpack and dropped to his hands and knees, alarm bells sounded in my mind. "What are you doing?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Going inside," he replied matter-of-factly. "Don't you want to see what's in there?" I did feel curiosity, but something stronger, a visceral warning, made me hesitate. "Maybe we should just look from out here. Use the flashlights." Jack ignored my suggestion, already positioning himself to crawl through the opening. "It's just an old building. What's the worst that could happen?" Those words, "what's the worst that could happen?" have preceded countless disasters throughout human history. Unable to let him explore alone, I reluctantly set down my pack and followed, the jagged edges of the hole scraping painfully against my shoulders as I wiggled through. The air inside struck me immediately, damp, cold, and stagnant with the unmistakable mustiness of long abandonment. We stood slowly in the dim interior, brushing dirt from our clothing. Light filtered weakly through the hole and small gaps in the roof, revealing a completely empty space. No pews, no altar, no furniture of any kind. Just bare walls surrounding a packed earth floor littered with crisp, dry leaves. At the far end stood a large wooden cross, weathered but intact. But what commanded immediate attention sat precisely in the room's center, a steel trapdoor embedded in the floor, partially covered with dirt. Heavy-duty bolts secured its edges, and thick chains wrapped around its perimeter, fastened with another substantial padlock identical to the one outside. I approached cautiously, examining the metal surface. Unlike everything else in the church, the trapdoor showed minimal aging. No scratches marred its surface, no significant rust degraded its mechanism. Just cold, dirty metal sealed deliberately against intrusion. Jack knelt beside it, giving the chains an experimental tug. They rattled ominously but held firm. Why would anyone need chains this heavy? I wondered aloud, voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Jack looked up, excitement building in his expression. "Maybe it's not actually a church," he suggested. "Could be some kind of hideout or storage facility." "For what?" I asked, though the question felt rhetorical. "Could be anything," he replied, standing and wiping dust from his hands. "Cash, valuables, some smuggler's stash. Why else lock it up like this?" I shook my head, unconvinced. Or it could be something dangerous, hazardous materials, something toxic people wanted to hide. My rational argument fell on deaf ears. Jack's expression had changed subtly. A strange intensity now animated his features, his eyes focused with unusual sharpness on the trapdoor. I'd known him for decades and had never seen him look this way before. "We need to get in there," he announced suddenly, moving toward the hole in the forest beyond. "Let's find something to break those chains." "Wait," I called, grabbing his arm as he passed. "You can't be serious." He yanked free with unexpected force, already crawling outside without responding. I scrambled after him, confused by his sudden obsession. Outside, Jack paced the perimeter, kicking at the ground and examining rocks scattered nearby. The purposefulness of his movements unsettled me. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked, though I already knew. "Looking for a rock," he confirmed without looking up. "Something heavy enough to smash that lock." The forest floor offered nothing substantial, just pine needles and small stones inadequate for his purpose. I approached him, trying to inject reason into his sudden fixation. "This is crazy," I said firmly. "Even if something valuable is down there, it clearly belongs to someone. Someone who went to extreme lengths to secure it." "So?" Jack replied, disturbingly unconcerned. "So if you're right about valuables, they probably belong to dangerous people. Breaking in would be signing our own death warrants." He didn't even acknowledge my point. "I'll hike until I find something suitable," he declared, striding purposefully into the trees. "However long it takes." His behavior had become so uncharacteristic that alarm transformed to genuine fear, not of the church or trapdoor, but for my friend's mental state. I pursued him, grabbed his shoulder, and physically spun him around. "What the hell has gotten into you?" I demanded. His response was immediate and violent. He shoved me backward with surprising strength. The confrontation escalated rapidly as we grappled among the trees, our friendship temporarily forgotten in the struggle. Though taller, Jack had always been leaner than me, and I eventually managed to force him against a tree trunk, restraining him before either of us suffered injury. "Stop!" I shouted directly into his face. "Just stop!" Something in my voice or the physical restraint seemed to penetrate his fixation. He froze suddenly, his aggressive posture dissolving. When he released his grip, I stepped back cautiously, both of us breathing heavily from the exertion. "What's happening to you?" I asked, more quietly this time. Jack looked up, his face alarmingly pale and damp with sweat. "I don't know," he responded, voice barely audible. "Talk to me," I pressed. "What's going through your head right now?" "I don't know," he repeated, then after a pause. "I couldn't stop thinking about that trapdoor. What might be down there?" He rubbed his temples as though fighting a headache. It felt like I needed to know, like it was calling to me somehow. His words sent an involuntary shiver through me. I crouched beside him, watching as he gradually returned to himself. "Are you okay to keep moving?" I asked eventually. "Let's put some distance between us and this place." He nodded weakly, and we retrieved our packs in silence, leaving the strange church behind us. But something fundamental had changed, and we both felt it. The remainder of our trip proceeded mechanically. We camped 2 more nights, maintained our routine of hiking, foraging, and water collection. But the enthusiasm that had defined our previous expeditions had vanished. I found myself watching Jack constantly, alert for any recurrence of his disturbing behavior. Though physically present, his mind seemed partially elsewhere, his responses delayed, his usual animated commentary replaced by distracted muttering. On our 5th night, stationed near a small lake miles from the church, I finally confronted him directly. Our small fire provided barely enough light to see his features as I posed the question that had preoccupied me since our discovery. "What really happened back there, Jack? And don't tell me you don't know." He stared into the flames, silent long enough that I wondered if he'd heard me. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unfamiliar hesitancy. "Have you ever felt pulled toward something? Not just curious, but physically drawn to it?" I shook my head, though the darkness likely obscured the gesture. "That trapdoor," he continued. "When I saw it, everything else just faded away, like nothing mattered except getting it open." His hands trembled slightly as he fed another stick into the fire. "I couldn't hear you anymore. Couldn't think straight. It was like something reached inside my head and flipped a switch." "That doesn't sound like curiosity," I observed. "It sounds like obsession, or something worse." Jack nodded slowly. "It wasn't natural. Nothing about it felt right, but I couldn't stop myself." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since the incident. "What do you think would have happened if we'd opened it?" The question hung between us, unanswerable, yet disturbing. What indeed lay beneath that reinforced metal door, secured with chains designed to withstand decades of determined intrusion? Nothing good, I finally replied. Nothing that should see daylight. Yeah, Jack agreed softly. That's what scares me now, because in that moment I would have done anything to find out. Sleep evaded me that night despite physical exhaustion. I lay awake listening to the forest sounds, wind through pine needles, distant animals moving through underbrush, Jack's troubled breathing from beneath his poncho shelter. My mind replayed the church's discovery repeatedly, focusing on details that seemed increasingly significant. The absence from official maps, the remarkable preservation of the trapdoor compared to the decaying structure around it, the immediate and profound effect on Jack's behavior. What haunted me most was the implication that mere proximity to the church had altered something fundamental in my friend's mind. I'd known Jack since childhood, his temperament, his reasoning, his responses to stress and excitement. The person who had fought me over that trapdoor had been Jack, yet simultaneously someone else entirely. Something had reached inside him, redirecting his thoughts and desires toward that sealed opening in the earth. The question that kept me staring into darkness was painfully simple. If nearness alone affected him so dramatically, what might have happened had we succeeded in breaking those chains? The following morning brought heavy rain, soaking us as we packed our meager camp and continued our trek. Jack seemed more himself, joking weakly about our drenched condition, helping me navigate a particularly steep descent. But the easy camaraderie of our previous trips remained absent. Something invisible now stood between us, acknowledged, but unaddressed. By late afternoon, the downpour intensified, forcing us to establish camp earlier than planned. We constructed a crude shelter using both our ponchos, huddling beneath while water cascaded around us. The proximity made conversation inevitable. I keep thinking about that church, Jack admitted, watching raindrops hammer the forest floor. Not like before, not that weird compulsion, just questions. Like what? I asked cautiously. Like who built it? And why there in the middle of nowhere? He gestured vaguely at the forest surrounding us. Churches need congregations. That place wasn't built for regular services. Maybe it wasn't always isolated, I suggested. Could have been a settlement nearby that disappeared. Logging camp or something similar. Jack shook his head. Then where are the ruins? The roads? There was nothing but wilderness for miles. I had no satisfactory answer. The church's isolation defied logical explanation, as did its absence from park records. Algonquin had been thoroughly surveyed and mapped. Structures, even abandoned ones, would appear in documentation. What about the trapdoor? I asked, despite my better judgment. Any theories? Jack's expression darkened. Too many. Storage cellar, shelter, prison cell. Grave? I added quietly. He nodded. That too. We fell silent, listening to rain pummel our improvised shelter. The forest surrounding us suddenly seemed less welcoming, its vastness concealing unknown histories and perhaps other anomalous structures forgotten by time and official record-keeping. We should report it, I suggested eventually. When we get back, tell the park rangers. Jack considered this briefly before responding. And say what? We found an unmapped church with a mysterious trapdoor that made me temporarily insane. They'd laugh us out of the station. He was right, of course. Without photographs or precise coordinates, our account would sound like campfire fiction or the product of wilderness-induced hallucination. Two exhausted campers mistaking a natural formation for something man-made or exaggerating a minor discovery. Besides, Jack continued, part of me doesn't want anyone else finding that place. Some things should stay lost in the woods. His sentiment resonated uncomfortably with my own feelings. Despite rational arguments for reporting our discovery, something deeper warned against drawing attention to the church. Whatever lay beneath that trapdoor had remained sealed for decades, perhaps longer. Maybe it should stay that way. Our final days in Algonquin passed uneventfully. We gradually recovered some of our previous enthusiasm, particularly when a successful fishing attempt provided a welcome change from foraged berries and edible plants. On our last night, beneath a clear sky filled with stars impossible to see from Toronto, we almost managed to discuss the church with detached curiosity rather than lingering unease. The cellar church, Jack dubbed it, attempting to transform our experience into something approaching humor. Our very own Algonquin mystery. I forced a smile but couldn't fully embrace his attempt at lightness. Let's hope it remains just that, a mystery. He nodded, understanding my meaning without elaboration. Some mysteries exist not to be solved but avoided entirely. Our return to civilization should have normalized everything. Hot showers, proper beds, reliable meals. Yet I found myself struggling to reintegrate. Toronto's constant noise and motion, once familiar and comforting, now felt abrasive and overwhelming. I would catch myself staring out my apartment window toward the northern horizon, thinking about that isolated church standing silent among ancient trees. Jack and I met regularly for drinks, planning future expeditions with apparent enthusiasm, but our conversations inevitably circled back to Algonquin and our discovery. We developed a shorthand, referring to it as the cellar stash, transforming it into an anecdote shared over beers, a strange interlude rather than a disturbing encounter. Jack would grin and shake his head, saying things like, "I'd be a millionaire right now if you hadn't stopped me." We'd laugh, change subjects, and pretend the memory carried no weight. Yet neither of us ever suggested returning to that section of Algonquin. When planning subsequent trips, we deliberately selected routes and regions far from that central area where the church stood. This unspoken avoidance contradicted our casual treatment of the memory. If it was merely an amusing story, why did we ensure such geographic distance in our future adventures? Weeks passed, then months. Outwardly, life resumed its predictable patterns. I worked my office job, Jack continued his career in restaurant kitchens, and we maintained our friendship through regular meetups and occasional weekend excursions to nearby conservation areas. Yet inwardly, something had fundamentally changed for me. Sleep became problematic. I would lie awake visualizing the church with perfect clarity, its weathered gray walls, rusted crosses, and especially that trapdoor sealed with chains and padlocks. Jack's wild theories about hidden treasures seemed increasingly implausible. Something about the structure's isolation and deliberate security measures suggested purposes far more sinister than mere storage. 3 months after our return, I found myself researching Algonquin's history during lunch breaks, searching for any reference to churches, abandoned buildings, or historical settlements within the park boundaries. Official documentation revealed nothing helpful. The area had been designated provincial parkland in 1893, with minimal development beyond recreational facilities and ranger stations. Before that designation, the region had hosted limited logging operations and indigenous communities, but detailed records of structures were sparse. I expanded my search to online forums frequented by experienced backcountry campers, hoping someone might have encountered the same building and shared their experience. Hours scrolling through discussions of Algonquin's trails, wildlife, and camping spots yielded nothing resembling our discovery. If others had found the church, they hadn't documented it publicly. The absence of corroborating information created an unsettling possibility. What if the church didn't exist as I remembered it? What if exhaustion, dehydration, or some environmental factor had caused Jack and me to misperceive something natural as man-made? I dismissed this theory almost immediately. Our experience had been too detailed, too prolonged for hallucination. We had touched those walls, examined that trapdoor, felt the cold metal chains. The church was real, regardless of its absence from official records. One evening, roughly 6 months after our Algonquin trip, Jack called unexpectedly. His voice carried an unfamiliar tension that immediately captured my attention. "Are you busy right now?" he asked without preamble. "Just watching TV," I replied. "What's up?" "I need to talk, in person. Can I come over?" 20 minutes later, Jack arrived at my apartment, agitation evident in his restless movements as he paced my small living room. He declined offers of beer or food, focused entirely on whatever had prompted his visit. "I've been having dreams," he finally announced, dropping heavily onto my couch. "About the church. Every night for the past 2 weeks. Something cold settled in my stomach. "What kind of dreams?" "Always the same. I'm alone inside the church, standing by that trapdoor. The chains are gone." He swallowed visibly. "And I'm opening it." "What's inside?" I asked, both dreading and needing to hear his answer. "That's just it. I always wake up right as I'm lifting the door, right at the edge of seeing." His hands trembled slightly as he ran them through his hair. "But here's the thing. I wake up feeling excited, like I'm about to receive something I've wanted my entire life." The admission hung between us, its implications disturbing on multiple levels. Jack's expression conveyed confusion and fear, but something else lurked beneath, a hint of the same intense focus I'd witnessed in the forest. "It's just dreams," I offered weakly, attempting reassurance neither of us believed. "Subconscious processing the weird experience we had." "Is it?" Jack challenged. "Because last night I woke up halfway to my front door, fully dressed, car keys in hand, like I was leaving. Sleepwalking? Maybe. Or maybe something's trying to pull me back there." His voice lowered almost to a whisper. "Sometimes I can feel it, even when I'm awake, like a tugging inside my head." I contemplated his words, comparing them with my own experience. While the church featured prominently in my thoughts, I'd experienced nothing resembling compulsion or sleepwalking episodes. Whatever affected Jack operated differently, or perhaps more intensely with him. "Have you considered talking to someone?" I suggested carefully. "A professional, I mean." Jack laughed humorlessly. "And tell them what? That I'm being summoned by a mysterious trapdoor in an abandoned church that doesn't officially exist. That would end well." He had a point. The experience defied conventional psychological explanations, existing in a gray area between trauma response and something altogether different. "What about medication?" I tried. "Something to help you sleep without dreams." "Already tried over-the-counter stuff. Doesn't work." He leaned forward, eyes intense. "I think I need to go back." Alarm surged through me. "That's a terrible idea." "Hear me out," he insisted. "Maybe seeing it again, confirming it's just a weird old building, would help my brain let it go. Exposure therapy, right?" "Or it could make everything worse," I countered. "What if you have the same reaction as before? What if it's stronger this time?" Jack had clearly anticipated my objections. "That's why you'd come with me. Keep me from doing anything stupid. We go, take some pictures, leave. Quick validation that it's nothing supernatural, just an abandoned structure with an odd basement." His proposal terrified me precisely because part of me recognized its potential merit. Demystifying our experience through daylight documentation might indeed diminish its psychological impact. Yet, simultaneously, returning felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate, as though revisiting the church would strengthen whatever connection had formed between it and Jack's mind. "Let me think about it," I said eventually. "This isn't something to rush into." Jack nodded, visibly relieved that I hadn't immediately rejected the idea. "Fair enough. Just don't take too long. These dreams are getting worse, not better." After he left, I sat alone contemplating our conversation. Jack's deteriorating mental state demanded action, but returning to Algonquin carried undeniable risks. My instincts screamed warnings against revisiting that place, yet I couldn't abandon my friend to face his growing obsession alone. What troubled me most was the situation's fundamental asymmetry. Whatever influence the church exerted had affected Jack profoundly while barely touching me. His description of feeling pulled toward the trapdoor matched his behavior during our original encounter, a single-minded fixation overriding reason and relationship. If we returned and he experienced that compulsion again, could I physically restrain him? And for how long? I slept poorly that night, mind cycling through scenarios and outcomes, none satisfactory. By morning, I'd reached a compromise position. We would research more thoroughly before considering a return trip. Perhaps additional information would render physical investigation unnecessary, or at least better prepare us for what we might face. 2 days later, Jack and I met at the Toronto Reference Library, seeking historical information beyond what online searches could provide. The massive facility housed extensive archives, including regional histories, surveyor reports, and newspapers dating back to Ontario's earliest European settlements. If documentation of our mysterious church existed anywhere, this represented our best chance of finding it. We began with historical maps of the Algonquin region, comparing modern topographical surveys with 19th century renderings. Provincial park establishment had changed boundaries and naming conventions, making direct comparisons challenging. Still, we methodically examined each map, seeking any structure marked in the approximate location of our discovery. Hours passed without success. The church remained as absent from historical documentation as from contemporary records. By mid-afternoon, frustration had replaced initial determination, and we expanded our search to regional newspapers and accounts of early settlements. "This feels pointless," Jack muttered, closing yet another index volume. Maybe it was built after these records, or by someone who deliberately avoided documentation. I understood his frustration, but continued scanning microfiche copies of a local newspaper from 1897. Something about the isolation and construction of that church suggested age rather than recency. Its weathered timbers and architectural simplicity pointed to 19th century origins rather than modern construction. Near closing time, when exhaustion threatened to end our search, I discovered something promising in an obscure regional history text. A single paragraph referenced a solitary chapel established by an unnamed religious order in Algonquin's interior during the 1880s, before the area's designation as provincial parkland. The account contained no specific location or purpose, merely noting the structure had been abandoned before completion following unfortunate events. "Look at this," I called to Jack, pushing the book across the table. He read quickly, expression brightening. "This has to be it. The timing fits, and solitary chapel matches what we saw." "Unfortunate events," I quoted. "Wonder what that means." "Could be anything in the 1880s, Jack reasoned. "Disease outbreak, accident, conflict with locals. Or something connected to whatever's under that trap door," I suggested quietly. The library's closing announcement interrupted further speculation. We photographed the relevant page and several maps for reference, then reluctantly departed with more questions than answers. Our discovery confirmed the church's historical existence, but added mystifying context. Why would a religious order establish an isolated chapel only to abandon it before completion? We continued our investigation over dinner at a nearby pub, reviewing our limited findings while constructing theories about the church's origins and purpose. Religious retreats were common in that era, Jack noted between bites of his burger. Maybe it was meant as a meditation space, somewhere deliberately isolated from civilization. "Doesn't explain the trap door," I countered, "or why they'd secure it so thoroughly." "Storage cellar for provisions," he suggested without conviction. "They'd need to protect food from animals if they were that remote." We both recognized the inadequacy of this explanation. No ordinary storage area would require such extensive security measures, particularly the heavy chains and industrial-grade padlocks. Whatever lay beneath that steel door had warranted extraordinary precautions against discovery or escape. "We need more information," I concluded. "Something specifically about that religious order and why they abandoned the project." Jack nodded agreement, but his expression had subtly changed, the earlier research enthusiasm giving way to something more introspective. "The dream stopped," he said abruptly. "What?" "Since we started researching. 2 nights without dreams about the trap door." He looked up, meeting my gaze directly, like it knows we're looking for answers. His statement sent an involuntary shiver through me. The implication of awareness, that whatever connection existed between Jack and the church operated bidirectionally, crossed a threshold from unsettling to genuinely frightening. "That's good, right?" I managed. "If the dreams have stopped?" "Maybe," he replied doubtfully. "Or maybe it's just waiting." I forced a laugh, trying to lighten his ominous suggestion. "Now you're being dramatic. It's an old building with a basement, not some sentient entity." Jack didn't share my attempted humor. "Then why can't I stop thinking about it? Even without the dreams, it's constantly in my head, like background noise that never quite fades." I had no satisfactory response. My own thoughts frequently returned to the church, but never with the compulsive quality Jack described. For him, the experience had transcended memory to become an ongoing psychological presence, less recollection than relationship. Our research continued sporadically over subsequent weeks. Jack located an archival reference to a contemplative order that had established temporary settlements in Ontario's wilderness during the late 19th century, though specific denominations and locations remained unspecified. I discovered a surveyor's journal from 1902 that briefly mentioned remains of previous habitation in Algonquin's interior, but provided no coordinates or detailed descriptions. Each fragment confirmed the historical reality of our discovery, without explaining its anomalous features or absence from official records. The church existed in documentation only as peripheral mentions and vague allusions. Its specific purpose and abandonment causes remaining mysterious. 2 months into our investigation, we hit an unexpected breakthrough. Jack's kitchen colleague, hearing about our research interest, mentioned his grandfather had worked as an Algonquin park ranger during the 1960s and possessed journals from that period. He arranged an introduction, and we soon found ourselves in the living room of Edwin Morley, a sharp-minded octogenarian with decades of wilderness experience. Grandfather kept meticulous records, Jack's colleague had explained. If anything unusual existed in his territory, he would have noted it. Edwin greeted us warmly, but with evident curiosity about our interest. After brief explanations, carefully framed to avoid sounding irrational, he retrieved several leather-bound journals from a bookshelf. 62 through 68, he explained, setting them on a coffee table. My most active years with the service. What exactly are you looking for? Structures in the interior, I replied. Specifically, an old church or chapel that might have been built before the park was established. Recognition flickered across Edwin's weathered features. The Keeper's Chapel, he said quietly. Jack and I exchanged startled glances. You know about it? Jack asked, trying to control his excitement. Edwin nodded slowly, selecting a journal marked 1964 and carefully turning brittle pages. It wasn't on official maps even then. More legend than documented landmark. Rangers knew about it, but visitors weren't guided there. Why not? I pressed. Edwin found his desired page and adjusted his reading glasses. Bad history, bad feeling about the place. He began reading from his journal. April 18th, 1964. Northwestern patrol extended due to reported smoke sightings. No evidence of campfires or unauthorized activity. Diverted to examine condition of Keeper's Chapel following winter storms. Structure remains intact despite age. Door chains maintained. Advised headquarters of inspection as per protocol. He looked up from the journal, observing our reactions. There were standing orders to check it periodically, but otherwise leave it undisturbed. The Keeper's Chapel, Jack repeated. Who or what was being kept? Edwin shrugged slightly. Before my time, old-timers wouldn't discuss it directly, just said it was best left alone. Some mentioned it wasn't originally a chapel at all, but something else entirely. Was there anything about a trapdoor inside? I asked. Or what might be underneath? The older man's expression shifted subtly, caution replacing conversational openness. You've been there, he stated rather than asked. Recently? We nodded confirmation. And you saw inside? Through a hole in the wall, Jack explained. The main door was still chained. Edwin closed his journal deliberately. Then you saw the floor access. Did you attempt to open it? No, I answered quickly. It was chained too, but we were curious about what it might contain. Relief visibly passed through the former ranger. Good. Very good. He leaned forward, voice lowering despite our private setting. Listen carefully. That structure was built for containment, not worship. The religious elements came later, attempts to sanctify what couldn't be destroyed. His statement confirmed my worst suspicions while raising countless new questions. Containment of what? I ventured. Edwin shook his head firmly. Some questions shouldn't be answered. Some knowledge shouldn't be sought. He tapped his closed journal. Even in these private records, I never documented what senior rangers told me about that place. Some things are better left unwritten. Jack's frustration showed clearly. We need to understand. I've been having dreams. Dreams? Edwin interrupted sharply, newfound alarm evident. About the chapel. About the trapdoor specifically, Jack admitted. Opening it. The elderly man's face paled visibly. That's how it begins, he whispered. First dreams, then waking thoughts, eventually compulsion. He studied Jack intently. How long since you visited the site? About 7 months, I answered when Jack hesitated. Edwin nodded slowly. Distance usually weakens the effect, unless susceptibility is high. He turned directly to Jack. You must not return there, under any circumstances. Distance is your only protection." "Protection from what?" Jack demanded, voice rising with frustration. "Everyone speaks in riddles about this place. I need concrete information." "No," Edwin replied firmly. "You don't. Knowledge strengthens connection. Understanding deepens vulnerability." He collected his journals with deliberate movements. "I'll tell you only this. What lies beneath that chapel was sealed there for essential reasons by people who understood exactly what they confronted. The chains aren't to keep curious hikers out. They're to keep something else in." His cryptic warning concluded our meeting, leaving us with confirmation of the church's significance but few actionable details. As we departed, Edwin pressed a small object into my hand, a tarnished silver medallion bearing unfamiliar symbols. "If the dreams worsen or compulsion strengthens," he instructed quietly, "place this under his pillow. It may help create distance." I pocketed the item without question, thanking him for his time. Outside, walking toward the subway station, Jack finally verbalized our shared frustration. "That was simultaneously enlightening and completely useless," he complained. "We confirm the church exists and has an official designation, but learn nothing concrete about what it contains or why it affects me specifically." I considered Edwin's deliberately vague warnings, weighing them against our months of research. "I think his generation practiced intentional obscurity," I suggested. "They knew enough to recognize danger, but chose to protect through ignorance rather than education." "Well, it's not working," Jack replied bitterly. "Ignorance hasn't stopped these dreams or thoughts. If anything, the mystery makes it worse." He was right, of course. Our investigation had provided historical validation without practical understanding. We knew the church, the Keeper's Chapel, had been built for containment rather than worship, but remained ignorant about what required such isolation and security. Edwin's warning against return offered no alternative solution for Jack's ongoing psychological connection to the site. That evening, alone in my apartment, I examined the medallion Edwin had given me. Its surface featured intricate engravings, concentric circles surrounding a complex geometric pattern. Though clearly designed with symbolic intent, its meaning and origin remained mysterious. I couldn't determine whether it represented religious iconography, occult symbolism, or something entirely different. Following Edwin's instructions, I mailed it to Jack the next morning with a brief note explaining its purported purpose. He responded with skeptical thanks, promising to try the suggested placement, despite doubts about its efficacy. What struck me most about his message was a subtle shift in tone, a resignation replacing previous agitation, as though he'd accepted his condition as permanent rather than solvable. 2 weeks passed without communication, unusual for our typically regular contact. When I finally called his apartment, Jack answered on the first ring, voice alert despite the late hour. "I was just thinking about you," he said, an odd formality coloring his usual casual greeting. "We should talk." "Everything okay?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Better than okay," he replied with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "I've gained perspective, clarity about our situation." His phrasing, "our situation rather than my problem," immediately triggered concern. "What kind of clarity?" "Not over the phone," he insisted. "Meet me tomorrow? The coffee shop near your office, noon?" I agreed without hesitation, simultaneously relieved at his apparent improvement and unsettled by the abrupt change. Throughout our friendship, Jack had never been one for dramatic announcements or mysterious meetings. His new approach suggested a fundamental shift in personality or perspective. Sleep proved elusive that night, my mind constructing scenarios for our upcoming conversation. Had the medallion worked as Edwin suggested, creating psychological distance from the church's influence? Or had Jack found alternative information explaining his connection to the site? Most concerning was the possibility that his improved mood signaled surrender rather than resolution, acceptance of compulsion rather than liberation from it. The following day, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table offering privacy for our conversation. Jack appeared precisely at noon, punctuality being another uncharacteristic behavior. He moved with unusual purpose, navigating between tables with fluid confidence rather than his typical casual amble. "Thanks for coming," he greeted, sliding into the seat opposite mine. His appearance startled me. He'd lost weight since our last meeting, his face thinner and more angular. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggested ongoing sleep disturbances despite his energetic demeanor. "You said you've gained clarity," I prompted after brief pleasantries. "About the church?" He nodded, leaning forward with intensity. "I've been thinking about Edwin's warnings, about containment versus worship." His voice lowered conspiratorially. "What if they got it backward? What if whatever's beneath that chapel isn't something dangerous needing containment, but something valuable requiring protection?" The theory wasn't entirely implausible, yet something in his eager delivery unsettled me deeply. "Valuable how?" I questioned cautiously. "Knowledge," he replied immediately. "Understanding beyond conventional limits. Think about it. Religious orders throughout history have sequestered sacred texts and artifacts, protecting them from destruction or misuse." His eyes gleamed with enthusiasm. "What if the Keeper's Chapel doesn't imprison something dangerous, but preserves something transformative?" His theory directly contradicted Edwin's warnings while conveniently aligning with his ongoing compulsion. This reframing transformed restriction into invitation, changing chains from barriers to protective measures guarding something precious. "That's an interesting perspective," I acknowledged neutrally. "What led you to this conclusion?" Jack hesitated briefly before responding. "The dream's changed. I'm still opening the trap door, but now I can see inside. Just glimpses, but enough to recognize possibility." "What kind of possibility?" I pressed, increasingly concerned by his evident excitement. "Knowledge, connection, understanding beyond anything we've imagined." He leaned closer, voice barely audible. "I think it's been calling to me specifically because I'm somehow prepared to receive what it offers." The medallion Edwin provided clearly hadn't diminished Jack's connection to the chapel. If anything, his psychological attachment had strengthened and evolved. Most alarming was his personalization of the experience, the belief that he specifically had been chosen or was uniquely prepared for whatever lay beneath that trapdoor. "Jack," I began carefully, "has it occurred to you that these feelings might be exactly what Edwin warned against? The strengthening compulsion he mentioned?" His expression hardened slightly. "Edwin knows only what others told him. Secondhand warnings from people who feared what they didn't understand." He dismissed the concern with a wave. "Besides, I've never felt clearer or more focused." This claim contradicted his physical appearance, the weight loss and evident exhaustion suggesting ongoing stress rather than newfound clarity. His certainty possessed an almost religious quality, faith replacing the questioning approach that had characterized our research. "What exactly are you planning?" I asked directly, suspecting his answer before he spoke. "We need to return," he confirmed. "Complete what we started. Open the trapdoor and discover what's been waiting for us." The plurality of his statement, waiting for us rather than waiting for me, didn't escape my notice. Despite claiming unique receptivity, he still positioned me as a necessary participant in this revelation. Whether from genuine desire for shared experience or need for practical assistance with the chains, he clearly viewed my involvement as essential. "That's not happening," I stated firmly. "Edwin made it clear returning would be dangerous, especially for you." Jack's expression shifted from enthusiasm to calculation. "I'm going with or without you," he declared, "but it would be safer with help." His manipulation was transparent yet effective, framing my participation as harm reduction rather than endorsement. If determined to return regardless of my input, accompanying him might indeed provide opportunity for intervention or restraint. "When are you thinking of going?" I asked, buying time while considering options. "This weekend," he replied immediately. "I've already requested days off work and prepped equipment." The immediacy of his plan shocked me. "That's in 3 days." He nodded confirmation. "The sooner the better. The connection is strongest now. I can feel it calling more clearly than ever." We spent the next hour in careful negotiation, me delaying without outright refusal, him pressing for commitment without revealing the full extent of his preparations. We eventually reached an uncomfortable compromise. I would accompany him to Algonquin, but maintained veto power over approaching the chapel depending on his mental state upon arrival. After our meeting, I immediately called Edwin Morley, explaining Jack's deteriorating condition and imminent plans. The elderly man's response confirmed my worst fears. The connection has progressed too far, he stated grimly. The medallion works only in early stages before the calling establishes deep roots. What exactly is calling to him? I demanded, abandoning pretense of measured inquiry. You know more than you've shared. Edwin sighed heavily. Knowledge passed verbally through generations of rangers suggested an entity, something ancient that predated European settlement. Indigenous peoples avoided that region entirely, considering it spiritually contaminated. His voice lowered. The religious order that built the chapel attempted to contain rather than destroy what they found. Their journals reportedly described it as older than Christian understanding and patient beyond human comprehension. How does it connect with certain people? I pressed. Susceptibility varies, Edwin explained. Some individuals resonate more strongly with its influence. Once connection establishes, physical distance becomes increasingly irrelevant. How do we break the connection? I asked, focusing on practical solutions. Edwin's hesitation spoke volumes. Traditional methods involve immersion in moving water, lakes, rivers, waterfalls. Temporary effectiveness at best. He paused. In advanced cases like your friend's, the only permanent solution is... He didn't complete the sentence, but his meaning registered clearly. Jack's condition had progressed beyond simple intervention. Whatever influence emanated from that chapel had embedded itself thoroughly in his consciousness, reshaping his perceptions and desires toward a single purpose, returning to open that trap door. I need to stop him from going back, I concluded. Yes, Edwin agreed quietly, by any means necessary. Despite my best efforts to dissuade him through rational arguments and emotional appeals, Jack remained fixated on returning to Algonquin. His determination had transformed into something approaching religious fervor, an unshakable conviction that answers awaited him beneath that rusted trap door. Our friendship, once defined by mutual respect and consideration, now strained under the weight of his single-minded obsession. I considered extreme measures, contacting his family with fabricated concerns about his mental health, reporting a vague threat to park authorities, even contemplating physical intervention if necessary. Each option presented significant ethical dilemmas without guaranteeing his safety. Ultimately, I concluded that accompanying him offered the best chance to protect him from whatever awaited at the Keeper's Chapel. 3 days later, we departed Toronto before dawn, Jack driving with uncharacteristic focus and minimal conversation. The familiar route north triggered memories of previous trips, carefree adventures unmarred by the darkness that now accompanied us. Jack had changed physically in the weeks since our coffee shop meeting, losing more weight while developing an almost feverish energy that manifested in constant motion and darting glances. You seem different, I observed as we passed Huntsville, attempting to gauge his mental state. Focused, he replied without elaboration, eyes fixed on the highway ahead. Edwin's warnings didn't concern you at all? I pressed, seeking any indication of caution or doubt. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Edwin knows stories. I know truth. What truth? That I've been chosen, that completion awaits. His certainty carried the unmistakable quality of delusion, absolute conviction impervious to contradiction or evidence. We reached Algonquin's western entrance by mid-morning, parking at the same trailhead we'd used 7 months earlier. Jack moved with mechanical efficiency, shouldering his pack and checking coordinates on his GPS unit. Unlike our previous expedition, this trip featured minimal equipment, just essentials for overnight camping and tools I suspected were intended for breaking chains. We should reach the chapel by late afternoon if we maintain good pace, he announced, already striding toward the forest. I want to arrive before sunset. I followed silently, mentally reviewing the contents of my own pack. Beyond standard camping gear, I carried 3 items Edwin had pressed upon me during a hurried meeting the previous evening. A flask of water from a specific waterfall within the park, a small cloth pouch containing herbs and minerals of unspecified purpose, and explicit instructions for their use if Jack's behavior escalated beyond reason. Last resort measures, Edwin had explained gravely. Traditional methods passed down through generations. Effectiveness uncertain, particularly against advanced influence. The uncertainty proved far from reassuring, but I accepted the items gratefully, recognizing them as my only concrete resources against whatever awaited us at the chapel. Our hike proceeded with grim efficiency, Jack setting a punishing pace that left little breath for conversation. Unlike previous trips characterized by appreciation of natural surroundings and companionable silences, this journey felt purposeful and tense. A mission rather than an adventure. Jack consulted his GPS obsessively, making minor course corrections to maintain direct routing toward our destination. His navigational certainty contrasted sharply with our initial discovery of the chapel, which had occurred through chance rather than deliberate tracking. "How can you be so precise about its location?" I questioned during a brief water break. "It didn't appear on any maps." "I know exactly where it is," he replied without elaboration, as though the knowledge existed independently of maps or memory. By mid-afternoon, the forest began displaying familiar characteristics. The specific density of pine and birch, the slight elevation changes, the pattern of underbrush growth. Even without GPS guidance, I recognized our approach to the chapel's location, a realization that sent involuntary shivers through my exhausted body. Jack's pace accelerated as recognition dawned, his movements becoming almost frantic with anticipation. When the chapel finally appeared through thinning trees, gray walls exactly as remembered, he stopped abruptly, breath catching audibly. "It's waiting," he whispered, an unsettling smile spreading across his gaunt features. The structure stood unchanged since our departure. Weathered walls supporting a moss-covered roof, rusted cross tilting precariously against the sky, main entrance secured with heavy chains and padlock. The forest had reclaimed no additional territory during our absence. The building remained suspended in its peculiar state of partial decay, neither collapsing further nor fully surrendering to natural reclamation. Jack approached reverently, circling toward the hole in the eastern wall that had provided our original entry. I followed cautiously, hands drifting unconsciously toward my pack containing Edwin's supplies. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through surrounding trees, creating disorienting patterns across the chapel's weathered exterior. "Jack," I called, attempting one final intervention. "Let's set up camp first. Approach this with clear heads tomorrow morning." He ignored my suggestion completely, already dropping to his knees beside the jagged opening. Without hesitation, he removed his pack and crawled inside, disappearing into the chapel's dim interior before I could formulate further objections. Left with no alternative, I followed reluctantly, the rough edges of the hole scraping against my shoulders just as they had months earlier. Inside, the air hung heavy with the same damp coldness I remembered, though an additional quality now permeated the atmosphere, an almost electric tension that raised goosebumps along my arms. Jack stood precisely where I expected, directly beside the steel trapdoor in the chapel's center. The chains remained intact, wrapped securely around the perimeter and fastened with the substantial padlock we recalled. He stared downward with singular focus, apparently oblivious to my entry or presence. "It's speaking," he murmured, kneeling beside the metal surface. "Can you hear it?" I remained silent, observing his behavior with mounting concern. One hand caressed the chains almost lovingly while the other reached for his pack, retrieving a heavy-duty bolt cutter partially concealed beneath other equipment. "Jack," I began carefully, "think about what you're doing. Edwin warned specifically against—" "Edwin fears what he doesn't understand," Jack interrupted sharply. "What they all feared. But I understand now. I've been prepared." He positioned the bolt cutter around a chain link, arm muscles tensing with anticipated exertion. Acting instinctively, I lunged forward, grabbing his wrist before he could apply pressure. "Stop," I demanded. "This isn't you talking. Something's influencing your thoughts." Jack's response came with shocking violence. He twisted suddenly, driving his elbow into my sternum with enough force to send me sprawling backward. The unexpected attack left me gasping for breath while he returned his attention to the chains, cutting through the first link with a metallic snap that echoed ominously through the empty structure. "I'm sorry," he said without looking up, continuing methodically to the next link. "But nothing can prevent completion now. It's waited too long already." Despite throbbing pain in my chest, I scrambled toward my discarded pack, frantically retrieving Edwin's waterfall flask. The elderly man's instructions echoed in my mind. Direct contact with the influenced person. Water must touch skin to create temporary barrier. Jack had severed 3 chain links by the time I regained my footing, the padlock now hanging uselessly from partially loosened restraints. His movements displayed practiced efficiency, suggesting he had rehearsed this process mentally or physically before our arrival. I uncapped the flask, approaching cautiously from behind. "Jack, please." I attempted one final verbal intervention. "Whatever's calling to you isn't offering knowledge. It's using you." He paused briefly, head tilting as though listening to contradictory voices. This momentary hesitation provided my opportunity. I lunged forward, splashing the flask's contents directly onto his exposed neck and face. His reaction was immediate and horrifying. A scream erupted from his throat, raw and animal in its intensity, as he recoiled from the metal door, hands clawing at his dampened skin. His body convulsed violently, collapsing sideways onto the dirt floor, while unintelligible sounds continued pouring from his mouth. I knelt beside him, heart pounding with fear and regret. "Jack, can you hear me?" His convulsions gradually subsided, replaced by shuddering breaths and disoriented blinking. When his eyes finally focused on mine, I saw confusion rather than obsession. The first glimpse of my actual friend since our discovery of the chapel months earlier. "What?" he managed weakly. "Where are we? What happened?" Relief flooded through me. "You're okay. We're in Algonquin, the chapel." I helped him to sitting position, supporting his trembling frame. "Do you remember coming here?" He shook his head slowly, eyes widening as surroundings registered. "The trapdoor," he whispered, gaze fixing on the partially unchained metal surface. "God, what was I doing?" "Something was influencing you," I explained gently. "Drawing you back here." Recognition dawned gradually across his features, memories apparently returning in disjointed fragments. The dreams, the voices. Horror replaced confusion. I was going to open it. I wanted to open it more than anything. "But you didn't," I reassured him. "We stopped in time." Jack struggled to stand, leaning heavily against me. "We need to leave, now, before it starts again." I nodded emphatic agreement, gathering our discarded packs while supporting his unsteady movements toward the wall opening. The trapdoor remained partially secured, 3 severed chain links leaving the majority still interwoven around its perimeter. Though functionally weakened, the restraints maintained visual integrity. Whatever lay beneath remained contained, if less securely than before. Outside, afternoon had surrendered to early evening, long shadows stretching across the forest floor. Jack stumbled toward a fallen log several meters from the chapel, collapsing onto it with visible exhaustion. "How bad was I?" he asked quietly, face buried in trembling hands. I hesitated, weighing honesty against compassion. "Pretty bad. Focused on opening that door to the exclusion of everything else." He nodded miserably. I remember feelings more than details. Certainty, purpose, like nothing else mattered except getting back here. His voice broke slightly. It wasn't me thinking those thoughts, but they felt like mine. "Edwin called it influence," I explained, sitting beside him. "Something from beneath the chapel reaching out, establishing connection with susceptible individuals." "Like infection," Jack murmured, "or possession." Neither characterization seemed inaccurate based on witnessed behavior. Whatever force emanated from beneath that trapdoor operated with intelligence and purpose, selecting specific targets and steadily reshaping their thoughts toward a single objective, releasing it from confinement. "How did you stop me?" Jack asked eventually. "I vaguely remember water." Traditional method according to Edwin. Water from a specific waterfall within the park. I patted my pack containing the remaining supplies. He provided emergency interventions, though he wasn't certain they'd work against advanced influence. Jack looked up sharply. "Advanced? Your connection progressed quickly, more intensely than typical cases apparently." I softened my tone, seeing alarm in his expression. "But the water worked. You're yourself again." "For now," he added quietly. "What if it's temporary? What if it starts again once the water dries?" His concern matched my own unspoken fears. Edwin had characterized the intervention as creating temporary barriers, rather than permanent severance. The influence might indeed reassert itself given time and proximity. "We should move further away," I suggested, standing and offering assistance. Make camp somewhere distant from the chapel. Tomorrow we hike out at first light. Jack accepted help rising, legs still unsteady beneath him. And if it comes back, the compulsion? More waterfall water, I assured him, and distance. Edwin believed physical separation eventually weakens the connection in most cases. Most cases, Jack repeated hollowly. We gathered our packs and moved away from the chapel, Jack frequently glancing backward as though expecting pursuit. Each step seemed to require conscious effort, his body apparently conflicted between departure and return. By the time we'd covered half a kilometer, night had begun settling around us, necessitating camp establishment in a small clearing beside a shallow stream. Jack collapsed immediately onto his ground sheet, physical and emotional exhaustion claiming dominance over residual fear. "Will you keep watch?" he requested, voice already slurring with approaching sleep. "Wake me if I try anything." "I'll watch," I promised, arranging my position strategically between him and the direction of the chapel. Despite expectations of resistance, sleep claimed him almost instantly, the first natural rest he'd likely experienced in weeks. I maintained vigilant observation, prepared to intervene if his behavior indicated returning influence. However, his breathing remained deep and regular throughout early evening hours, body occasionally twitching but never showing signs of rising. My own exhaustion gradually demanded attention, eyelids growing heavy despite determination to maintain watch. Fighting fatigue proved increasingly difficult as minutes stretched to hours without incident. Eventually, practicality forced compromise. I positioned Edwin's remaining supplies within immediate reach before allowing myself brief periods of light sleep, jerking awake frequently to check Jack's condition. Morning arrived with gray drizzle filtering through overhead branches. I woke fully to discover Jack already upright, silently packing his equipment with methodical precision. His expression remained unreadable in the dim light, prompting immediate concern. "How are you feeling?" I asked cautiously, hand drifting toward the waterfall flask. He glanced up, eyes clear and focused. "Like myself, mostly." His movements maintained efficiency without the feverish quality that had characterized the previous day's behavior. The dreams came back briefly during the night, not as strong, but present. "Why didn't you wake me?" I demanded, alarm replacing relief. "You needed rest too," he replied simply. "Besides, they were just dreams this time, no compulsion to act." He secured his pack with a final adjustment. "But we should leave quickly. I don't trust this clarity to last near that place." We abandoned camp without preparing breakfast, prioritizing departure over comfort. Jack set a deliberately measured pace, conserving energy while maintaining steady progress away from the chapel. Though physically weakened, his navigational skills remained intact, establishing efficient routing toward the trailhead. "I keep thinking about those chains," he commented during a brief water break several hours into our hike. "I damaged them, weakened the seal." "Most links remained intact," I reminded him. "The trapdoor is still secured." "But less effectively than before," he countered. "What if that's enough? What if it can now reach further, influence more people?" The possibility had occupied my thoughts throughout our journey, but I'd avoided voicing it aloud. "We should tell Edwin. Report the damage so proper authorities can repair it." Jack nodded agreement, but his expression suggested limited faith in official response. "Those chains were ancient, maybe original to whatever religious order built the chapel. Who would even know how to properly restore them now?" His question highlighted the fundamental problem with structures like the Keeper's Chapel, protection systems established by previous generations with specific knowledge and purpose, maintained through tradition rather than understanding. When tradition faltered or knowledge disappeared, protections became increasingly vulnerable to failure. We reached the trailhead by late afternoon, both exhausted but relieved by return to civilization. Jack's condition had stabilized throughout our journey, dreams and compulsive thoughts apparently diminishing with increasing distance from the chapel. By the time we reached his vehicle, he displayed no observable symptoms beyond normal fatigue and lingering psychological distress. "What happens now?" he asked as we loaded our equipment. "Long term, I mean." Edwin suggested continued distance, I recalled, avoiding that section of Algonquin entirely, breaking patterns that might reinforce connection. "And if that's not enough?" Jack pressed. "If the dreams continue despite distance?" I retrieved Edwin's cloth pouch from my pack, offering it to Jack. He provided this as ongoing protection. Didn't specify exact contents or usage, just that it contains traditional elements for maintaining barriers. Jack accepted the small bundle cautiously, examining its hand-stitched exterior. Seems inadequate against whatever that thing is. It's what we have, I replied simply. The drive back to Toronto passed mostly in silence, both of us processing events through individual lenses. Jack occasionally shared fragments of memory from his influenced period, disjointed impressions of voices, certainties, and compelling visions that had directed his actions. Each recollection emerged with evident distress, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as he forced words into coherent form. It wasn't evil exactly, he attempted explaining at one point. Not in traditional terms, more fundamentally different. Operating on principles and purposes beyond human understanding. Different enough to be dangerous, I noted. He nodded slowly. Precisely because of that difference. Like deep-sea creatures brought to surface environments. Destruction occurs through incompatible contexts rather than malicious intent. His analogy provided cold comfort. Intent mattered less than impact when considering potential harm, and something capable of exerting such profound influence across physical distance clearly possessed significant power regardless of purpose. We reached Toronto after nightfall. Streetlights and traffic marking jarring transition from wilderness isolation to urban density. Jack parked outside my apartment building, engine idling as we contemplated appropriate farewells under extraordinary circumstances. "Thank you," he said eventually, meeting my gaze directly, "for stopping me, for coming back with me despite knowing the risks." I accepted his gratitude with a simple nod. "Will you be okay tonight? You could stay over if you're concerned about being alone." He shook his head. "I need to face this independently at some point. Might as well start now." His attempted smile fell short of convincing. "Besides, I have Edwin's magic pouch and instructions to call immediately if anything changes." We embraced briefly before parting, the gesture carrying more significance than typical goodbyes. Jack promised to check in regularly as he adjusted to post-influence recovery, assuring me the dreams had continued fading throughout our return journey. Alone in my apartment, I showered away days of accumulated wilderness grime, watching filthy water disappear down the drain while contemplating our narrow escape. The shower's white noise couldn't fully drown out recurring thoughts. Jack's feverish determination, the partially damaged chains, the certainty that whatever lay beneath that trapdoor remained alert and patient behind weakened restraints. Sleep came reluctantly that night, despite physical exhaustion. When consciousness finally surrendered to slumber, dreams arrived immediately. Not of the chapel directly, but forest pathways leading inexorably toward its location. I navigated densely wooded terrain with dream logic certainty, each step drawing me closer to that weathered structure and its central secret. I woke sweating and disoriented at 3:17 a.m., momentary confusion giving way to cold realization. The influence had transferred. Weaker, more distant, but unmistakably present. The same compulsive curiosity that had originally claimed Jack now reached tentatively toward my consciousness. Morning brought temporary clarity with rational daylight thoughts. I called Edwin immediately, describing both the weakened chains and my disturbing dreams. His extended silence following my account confirmed the seriousness of both developments. "The containment has been compromised," he finally stated, "and you've become secondary target for influence." "Secondary? Your friend established primary connection," Edwin explained. "You've developed connection through proximity to him and the site itself, weaker but potentially strengthening over time." "How do I stop it?" I asked directly. "Distance helped your friend. Should help you as well." His voice carried uncertainty despite reassuring words. "The pouch contents. Keep them close, particularly during sleep. Traditional barriers remain somewhat effective against peripheral influence." "And the chapel itself?" I pressed. "The damaged chains." "I've notified individuals who maintain awareness of the site," he replied carefully. "They'll implement appropriate measures." "What measures exactly?" I challenged, frustrated by continued vagueness. Edwin sighed audibly. "Temporary reinforcement of remaining restraints, possibly relocation of the entire structure if degradation continues." His tone suggested limited confidence in either approach. Relocation wouldn't address whatever's beneath the trapdoor, I pointed out. No, he agreed grimly. That presents more complex challenges beyond current capabilities. Our conversation concluded with mutual promises of continued communication if circumstances changed. Edwin committed to weekly check-ins regarding my mental state, particularly dream content and any developing compulsive thoughts. Jack and I maintained regular contact throughout subsequent weeks, comparing experiences and recovery progress. His dreams diminished steadily with continued distance from Algonquin, though occasional intense episodes still disrupted his sleep. My own dreams remained consistently present, but lacked the overwhelming compulsion he had originally experienced, suggesting Edwin's assessment of secondary or peripheral connection was accurate. We developed personal mitigation strategies. Jack relocated temporarily to his sister's home in Montreal, maximizing geographical separation from the chapel. I relied heavily on Edwin's herbal pouch, keeping it beneath my pillow nightly while researching traditional protective practices from various cultural traditions. Neither approach eliminated the connection entirely, but both seemed to maintain functional barriers against strengthening influence. 3 months after our return trip, Jack called unexpectedly late one evening. His voice carried the first genuine excitement I'd heard since before our Algonquin disaster. "The dream stopped completely," he announced without preamble. 2 weeks without a single one. Relief flooded through me. "That's fantastic news. Since Montreal?" "Yes, but this feels different from gradual fading, more like sudden severance." His tone shifted toward cautious optimism. "I think whatever it is has stopped reaching for me." "Why would it stop?" I questioned, immediately suspicious of convenient resolution. Jack hesitated before responding. "Maybe it found someone more receptive, someone closer." The implication settled heavily between us. If the entity beneath the chapel operated with limited capacity for external connection, resources previously focused on Jack might have been redirected toward more accessible targets, potentially including me or others who had encountered the site. "Have your dreams changed?" he asked, confirming my unspoken concern. "Not significantly," I answered honestly. "Still present but manageable." "Be careful," he advised unnecessarily. "If my theory is correct and it's redirecting attention rather than simply weakening overall." He didn't complete the thought, leaving implications hanging unspoken. If the entity had simply transferred focus rather than lost strength, my secondary connection might intensify to replace Jack's severed primary channel. "I'll maintain precautions," I assured him. "Keep Edwin updated about any changes." Over subsequent weeks, Jack's recovery continued impressively. He returned from Montreal to resume his Toronto life, showing no signs of recurring influence despite proximity reduction. My own condition remained stable rather than improving. Dreams consistently present but contained, occasional intrusive thoughts about the chapel appearing during waking hours but easily dismissed through conscious effort. Edwin monitored both situations with evident interest, particularly the apparent transfer of primary focus away from Jack. During one of our regular calls, he shared limited information about chapel remediation efforts. "The site has been temporarily secured," he explained vaguely. "Additional measures implemented around the structure itself." "What about beneath it?" I pressed. "The actual source?" "Beyond current capabilities," he admitted reluctantly. "Some things can only be contained, not eliminated." His assessment provided little comfort, but confirmed suspicions developed through months of experience with the entity's persistent influence. Whatever lay beneath that trapdoor possessed resilience and adaptability beyond conventional threats, capable of reaching across significant distances, establishing psychological connections with strategic patience, and potentially redirecting focus when particular channels closed. Jack and I gradually resumed normal friendship patterns, though we tacitly avoided camping or wilderness activities by mutual unspoken agreement. We transformed our extraordinary experience into occasional dark humor, referring to the cellar stash during nights out, or jokingly attributing unusual behavior to chapel influence. These attempts at normalization provided psychological distance while acknowledging shared trauma that outsiders could never fully comprehend. Years have passed since our encounters with the Keeper's Chapel. Jack has recovered completely, showing no lingering effects from his temporary obsession with the trapdoor. He married, changed careers, and moved forward with life apparently unburdened by persistent connection to that isolated structure. I've been less fortunate. Though the influence never intensified to levels Jack experienced, it never fully disappeared either. Dreams about the chapel occur with stubborn regularity. Not every night, but frequently enough to maintain awareness of continued connection. During particularly vivid episodes, I find myself standing before that partially unchained trapdoor, hearing indistinct whispers from beneath the metal surface. Edwin passed away peacefully last winter, leaving behind journals documenting his ranger experiences and mysterious encounters within Algonquin's vast wilderness. His family, knowing our connection, shared entries specifically referencing the chapel, careful observations of the structure's condition over decades of regular monitoring. His final notation, made 3 months before his death, mentioned evidence of regular inspection and maintenance by designated authorities, suggesting the containment system continues receiving attention despite his absence. I've maintained personal protective measures. Edwin's herbal pouch replaced regularly with identical components, sleeping rituals designed to minimize dream vulnerability, and most importantly, absolute avoidance of Algonquin Park and surrounding regions. These precautions establish workable equilibrium rather than complete liberation, allowing functional life despite persistent shadows of past encounter. Jack and I still meet regularly, though we discuss the chapel less frequently as years advance. During one recent dinner, after several drinks lowered usual conversational barriers, he asked the question we'd both avoided articulating directly. Do you think we did the right thing, leaving it there? The question's complexity defied simple response. We had followed Edwin's guidance, reporting damaged restraints while maintaining established containment rather than attempting more permanent resolution. Whether this represented courage or cowardice remained unanswerable without fuller understanding of what exactly lay beneath that chapel floor. I don't think we had capacity to do anything else, I finally replied. Some situations exceed individual responsibility. Jack nodded slowly, accepting this limited reassurance. I sometimes wonder if others have found it since then. If it's establishing new connections, drawing new people toward that trapdoor. His concern mirrored my own recurring thoughts. The entity's apparent patience and strategic approach suggesting long-term perspective beyond human timeframes. What represented significant years for us might constitute mere moments in its perception, each failed opportunity followed by renewed attempts with different susceptible individuals. The Rangers know about it, I reminded him. Edwin's colleagues continue monitoring the site. Until they don't, Jack countered grimly. Until knowledge fades or priorities change or development encroaches further into Algonquin's interior. His observation highlighted fundamental vulnerability in any containment system dependent on human maintenance and awareness. Institutional memory degrades over generations. Protective rituals become empty gestures without understanding their purpose. Wilderness barriers diminish through accessibility improvements and technological advancement. Maybe that's why it keeps reaching out, I suggested. It recognizes the inevitable entropy of human systems and waits patiently for failure. Jack shivered visibly despite the restaurant's comfortable temperature. That's the most terrifying possibility, that it's not just sentient, but strategic, playing extremely long games. We finished our meal in thoughtful silence, departing with unusually somber goodbyes. Though we'd constructed functional lives around our experience, conversations like this revealed persistent undercurrents of uncertainty and responsibility that would likely never fully resolve. That night, predictably, dreams of the chapel returned with unusual clarity. I stood inside the weathered structure, ambient light filtering through roof gaps to illuminate the central trap door. The chains remained partially broken, exactly as we'd left them years earlier. Those strange symbols now marked the surrounding dirt floor. Unfamiliar characters suggesting subsequent visitors had performed rituals or protective measures around the compromised seal. In this dream, unlike previous iterations, I approached the metal surface voluntarily, curious rather than compelled. No whispers emerged from beneath, no sense of external influence directed my movements. I knelt beside the trap door, examining damage we'd inadvertently caused through Jack's obsessive intervention years earlier. 3 severed links hung uselessly among otherwise intact chains, the pattern exactly matching memory of our confrontation. I reached toward one broken segment, fingers closing around cool metal with dream-tangible realism. As contact established, dream logic shifted perspective suddenly, awareness expanding beyond physical confines to encompass the chapel's complete history. I perceived its original construction not as religious sanctuary, but deliberate containment structure. Builders working with knowledge passed through generations about what lay beneath that specific forest location. The religious elements, crosses, chapel design, came later. Attempts to sanctify and reinforce physical barriers with spiritual protection, drawn from belief systems that post-dated the entity's imprisonment. The perspective shift continued expanding, revealing centuries of maintenance and renewal. Different groups assuming responsibility as knowledge transferred imperfectly between generations. Native populations had maintained distance through cultural prohibitions before European settlers arrived. Religious orders subsequently integrated the site into their cosmological frameworks while preserving essential containment functions. Park establishment had complicated matters by simultaneously protecting the location from development while increasing potential for accidental discovery. Ranger services assumed monitoring responsibility, developing protocols for regular inspection while discouraging visitor access through deliberate omission from official maps and records. Throughout these transitions, the entity beneath remained constant, patient, aware, opportunistically testing barriers through psychological connection with receptive individuals. Not malevolent in human terms, but fundamentally incompatible with human understanding, operating according to principles and purposes beyond conventional comprehension. The dream concluded with sudden perspective reversion, awareness contracting from expansive historical knowledge back to individual viewpoint. I stood again before the partially chained trapdoor, now understanding its significance within larger patterns of containment and persistence. The entity had existed before human presence in the region and would likely continue long after human departure, its time frame rendering our interventions temporary regardless of perceived permanence. I woke with unsettling clarity rather than typical dream confusion, insights from the expanded perspective remaining accessible to conscious consideration. For the first time, I recognized our experience not as isolated incident, but continuation of established pattern. Two more individuals among countless others who had encountered the Keeper's Chapel throughout its existence, momentarily connected to something ancient before returning to ordinary life. This reframing brought neither comfort nor resolution, but a different relationship with persistent dreams and occasional intrusive thoughts. The connection wasn't personal, but circumstantial. Proximity creating temporary bridges between fundamentally different existences. The entity reached outward not from malice, but from nature, following patterns established long before human understanding attempted categorization or containment. Jack and I continue our friendship, our shared experience providing unique perspective that neither fully discusses with others. He appears genuinely free from lasting connection, while I maintain functional coexistence with persistent but manageable influence. We never returned to Algonquin, tacitly avoiding wilderness adventures that might trigger renewed vulnerability. The Keeper's Chapel stands somewhere in that vast forest expanse, weathered walls containing ancient mystery behind partially compromised chains. Rangers or their institutional descendants presumably continue monitoring and maintenance, extending centuries-old containment through systems and knowledge increasingly divorced from original understanding. Occasionally, I contemplate reporting my ongoing dreams to authorities, providing warning about potential vulnerability in existing protections. Each time, practical considerations intervene. Who exactly would receive such information? What credibility would accompany reports based on subjective experience rather than verifiable observation? How would new knowledge differ meaningfully from protections already in place? Instead, I maintain personal distance, both geographical and psychological, from that isolated structure and its underground secret. The dreams continue with stubborn regularity, neither intensifying nor diminishing as years pass. I've accepted them as permanent consequence of brief proximity to something beyond conventional understanding, a persistent shadow from encounter with the inexplicable. What lies beneath that trapdoor remains contained for now, secured behind ancient chains and forgotten religious symbols in a structure absent from official maps. Whether this containment represents appropriate response or merely delayed confrontation remains unanswerable without fuller comprehension of what exactly waits in darkness beneath weathered floorboards. The church exists somewhere in Algonquin's vast wilderness, standing silent among ancient trees while seasons pass without notice. And whatever remains chained beneath that rusted trapdoor continues its patient existence, occasionally reaching outward through dreams and whispered thoughts, waiting for chains to weaken or barriers to fail or understanding to finally bridge fundamental differences between its reality and our own. I sincerely hope it waits forever.